Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. The mountaineer bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of the ranger station, my breath forming little clouds in the crisp morning light. Mount Shasta loomed above, its peak still snow-capped even in the late spring. I'm Leroy Davison, and I've been a forest ranger here longer than most folks keep goldfish alive. It was May 1997, and I'd been posted at Shasta for 5 years already. At 43, I wasn't the youngest ranger on the force, but I sure as hell wasn't ready for retirement. The job suited me, quiet, straightforward, and far from the chaos of city life I'd left behind in Sacramento. I adjusted my pack, checking my radio and water bottle out of habit. The weight of my knife at my hip was reassuring, a constant companion on these solitary patrols. As I started down the familiar trail, my boots crunching on gravel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Now, I'm not one for flights of fancy. Years in these woods have taught me that most unexplained phenomena have perfectly rational explanations. But there's a difference between being skeptical and being stupid. And stupid is something I've worked hard not to be. I remembered my first year here, when a group of campers swore they'd seen lights dancing over the mountain at night. Turned out to be nothing more than a few students with drones and too much time on their hands. Then there was the Bigfoot sighting that had half the town in an uproar. Just a particularly large black bear with a skin condition, but not everything had such neat explanations. Like the time I found those strange markings carved into trees deep in the back country. No animal I knew could have made them, and they were too far out for casual vandals. I reported it, of course, but nothing ever came of it. Just another unsolved mystery to add to Shasta's collection. As I hiked, I let my mind wander back to my life before Shasta. 12 years as a cop in Sacramento had left me burnt out and cynical. The constant noise, the parade of human misery, the politics, it all became too much. When the opportunity came to trade in my badge for a ranger's hat, I jumped at it. The transition wasn't easy. The silence of the forest was deafening at first, and the isolation played tricks on my mind. But gradually I learned to appreciate the quiet, to read the subtle signs of the wilderness. The way birds suddenly go silent when a predator is near. The barely perceptible paths animals make through the underbrush. The shift in the air that signals an approaching storm. And paused at a lookout point, gazing out over the vast expanse of green below. This is my domain now as much as it belonged to anyone. I'd hiked every trail, climbed every accessible peak, and knew the lay of the land better than the back of my own hand. But even after all these years, the mountain could still surprise me. Like the hidden waterfall I'd stumbled upon last autumn, tucked away in a grove so dense I passed by it 100 times without noticing. Or the cave system that opened up after a minor earthquake 2 summers ago. We're still mapping its full extent. As I continued my patrol, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest felt different today, quieter maybe. Usual chatter of birds and rustling of small animals seemed muted, as if the woods were holding their breath. I've learned to trust these instincts. They've saved my hide more than once, like the time I sensed a mountain lion stalking me and managed to scare it off before it pounced, or when I felt the tremors of an approaching landslide and got a group of hikers to safety just in time. But this was different. It wasn't the familiar weariness of known dangers. This was something new, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I radioed in my position, more out of habit than necessity. Davison here, starting the Eastern Trail check over. The reply came back garbled, static, nearly drowning out the words copy, vision, be full, strange ports from yeah, over. I frowned, tapping the radio. The reception was usually better than this. Repeat blast over nothing but static answered me. Great. Looks like I was on my own for this one. Not that it was anything new. Being a ranger often meant long stretches of solitude relying on your own skills and judgment. As I approached the start of the Eastern Trail, a less used path that I needed to check for debris and overgrowth, that nagging feeling of wrongness intensified. The air felt heavier, almost oppressive, and the silence had deepened to an unnatural hush. I've never been one for ghost stories or campfire tales. In my experience, the real dangers in these woods are mundane enough: flash floods, rock slides, the occasional ornery bear. But standing there at the trailhead, I couldn't help but remember some of the legends surrounding Mount Shasta. Stories of hidden cities, interdimensional portals, and creatures that defied explanation. I shook my head, chuckling at my own foolishness. Guess even an old cynic like me could get spooked sometimes. With a deep breath, I stepped onto the trail, ready to face whatever the day might bring. Little did I know as I ventured deeper into the shadowy forest that this routine patrol would challenge everything I thought I knew about these woods. And about reality itself. The Eastern Trail was a mess, just as I'd expected. Spring rains had turned parts of it into a muddy obstacle course, and fallen branches littered the path. I sighed, knowing I was in for a long day of clearing and minor repairs. As I worked, methodically removing debris and marking areas that needed more extensive maintenance, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't unusual to spot wildlife during these patrols. Deer, the occasional black bear, even a mountain lion if you were unlucky. But today, the forest seemed eerily empty. I paused to wipe sweat from my brow and the silence pressing in around me. That's when I noticed it, a faint, unfamiliar scent on the breeze. It was musty and slightly sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with something metallic. I frowned, trying to place it, but came up empty. Probably just some plant I haven't come across before, I muttered to myself. But the words sounded hollow, even to my own ears. As I continued up the trail, the terrain became steeper and more rugged. This section wasn't used much by casual hikers, which meant it was often overlooked in routine maintenance. I made mental notes of areas that needed attention, knowing I'd have to come back with a team to tackle some of the larger issues. The day wore on, and the strange atmosphere began to wear on my nerves. More than once, I caught myself reaching for my radio, only to remember the poor reception. The isolation, usually a comfort, now felt oppressive. It was late afternoon when I reached a small clearing. I decided to take a break, sitting on a fallen log to eat the sandwich I'd packed. As I chewed mechanically, my eyes scanned the tree line, searching for... I couldn't say, but something felt off. That's when I saw it. A flash of movement at the edge of the clearing. I froze, sandwich halfway to my mouth, as I strained to catch another glimpse. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I'd imagined it, I saw it again, a shadow darker than the surrounding forest slipping between the trees. I stood slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the knife at my belt. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. "Is someone there?" No response came, but I could have sworn I heard the crack of a branch breaking somewhere deep in the woods. I took a step towards the tree line and stopped, common sense warring with curiosity. In the end, caution won out. I packed up my things and continued on the trail, but now every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every rustle of leaves was a cause for alarm. The rest of the day passed in a haze of hypervigilance. My nerves were stretched to the breaking point. As twilight began to fall, I knew I needed to make camp for the night. I found a suitable spot, a small, flat area with good visibility, and began to set up my tent. The routine tasks helped calm my nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. At night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I listened to the nocturnal sounds of the forest. Normally they were a soothing lullaby, but tonight they seemed ominous, full of hidden menace. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, my dreams were filled with shadowy figures and the scent of decay. I awoke at first light, groggy and unrested. The events of the previous day seemed distant and foolish in the clear morning air. I packed up camp efficiently, eager to get back to my patrol and put the whole thing behind me. The trail grew more overgrown as I continued east, pushing deeper into a section of the forest that saw little human traffic. Despite having to occasionally hack through dense underbrush with my machete, I was making good time. It was just past noon when I stumbled upon the tent. At first glance, it looked like any other piece of abandoned camping gear, not an uncommon sight in these parts despite our best efforts to promote leave no trace principles. But as I got closer, I realized this was different. The tent was in tatters, the fabric shredded and discolored. It looked like it had been there for months, maybe longer, which was strange. This area was supposed to be checked regularly. I approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The campsite was a mess. Gear was strewn about haphazardly, as if someone had left in a great hurry, or as if something had torn through the site searching for what I knelt to examine, a backpack that lay half open on the ground. The contents were moldy and waterlogged, but I could make out a few personal items, a book, a flashlight, a wallet. I picked up the wallet with a gloved hand. Flipping it open, the driver's license inside belonged to Gregory Walters, age 28, from Seattle. I made a mental note of the name, intending to run it through our database when I got back to the station. As I continued to survey the scene, a glint of white caught my eye. I moved closer, pushing aside a clump of ferns, and felt my blood run cold. Bones, human bones, picked clean and scattered. I'd seen my share of gruesome sights both as a cop and a ranger, but this was something else. The bones weren't just scattered randomly, they were arranged in a deliberate pattern, forming a crude circle around the remains of a campfire. I stood quickly, my heart pounding. This was way above my pay grade. I needed to call this in, get a forensics team out here as soon as possible. I reached for my radio, only to be met with the same staticky silence as before. Cursing under my breath, I realized I had to climb to higher ground to get a signal. I marked the location of the campsite on my GPS and started to make my way up a nearby ridge. As I climbed, that feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own labored breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I was almost to the top of the ridge when I heard it, a low, guttural sound somewhere between a growl and a moan. I froze, my head going to my knife. The sound came again, closer this time, and with it came that strange, sweet, metallic scent I'd noticed the day before. Slowly I turned, scanning the forest below. For a long moment I saw nothing. Then a movement caught my eye. Something large, moving with unnatural stealth through the underbrush. I caught only a glimpse, a flash of pale, mottled skin and a hint of an elongated limb before it vanished into the shadows. But it was enough to send a jolt of primal fear through my body. Whatever I had just seen, it wasn't a bear or mountain lion or any other animal I was familiar with. It was something else entirely, something that had no business existing in these woods or anywhere else. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my radio, desperately hoping for a signal. To my relief, the static cleared as I held it up. "This is Ranger Davison," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need immediate backup and a forensics team at my location. I found human remains and something else, something I can't explain." As I waited for a response, I kept my eyes on the forest below, watching for any sign of movement. But the wads remained still and silent, holding their secrets close. The wait for backup felt like an eternity. I stayed on the ridge, keeping a vigilant watch on the forest below. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. But whatever I had seen seemed to have vanished. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, I heard the distant thrum of a helicopter. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by doubt. How was I going to explain what I'd seen? They'd think I was crazy or worse, incompetent. The chopper landed in a small clearing about half a mile from my position. I made my way down to meet them, my nerves still on high alert. The forensics team, led by Dr. Amelia Reeves, listened to my report with professional skepticism. "Human remains, you say?" Dr. Reeves asked, her eyebrow raised. "And this creature, can you describe it in more detail?" I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "It was big," I said finally, "bigger than a bear, pale with long limbs, moved like nothing I've ever seen before." I could see the doubt in their eyes, but to their credit, they took my words seriously. We made our way to the campsite, the team documenting everything meticulously. As they worked, I stood guard, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The forest had come alive again with the sounds of evening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was nearly dark when we heard it, that same low, guttural sound I'd heard earlier. The team froze, looking to me with wide eyes. "Pack it up," I said, my voice low and urgent. "We need to get out of here now." But it was too late. As we turned to leave, there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing. In the fading light, I could finally see it clearly, and I almost wished I couldn't. It was as tall as a grizzly bear, but lankier, with limbs too long and jointed in all the wrong places. Its skin was a sickly pale color, stretched tight over its frame, with patches that seemed to have rotted away. But its face was the worst part. It was almost human, but twisted, with empty black eyes and a jaw that hung askew, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, with a speed that defied its size, the creature lunged forward. Chaos erupted as everyone scattered. I drew my knife, knowing it was woefully inadequate, but unwilling to go down without a fight. The creature mouthed through our group with terrifying efficiency. I saw Dr. Reeves go down, her scream cut short as the thing's claws raked across her back. I rushed forward, my knife slashing at the creature's side. The blade connected, but it seemed to have little effect. The thing turned its attention to me, those black eyes boring into mine. Up close, the smell was overwhelming, that sickly sweet rot that I'd noticed before, but 100 times stronger. I gagged, stumbling backward. It swiped at me with one elongated arm, and I felt a searing pain across my chest. I felt the world spinning around me. Through blurry vision, I saw the creature turn its attention to the rest of the team who were fleeing into the woods. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. When I finally managed to push myself up, the clearing was empty except for the scattered equipment and dark stains on the forest floor. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio, but it had been smashed in the chaos. I was alone, injured, and lost in the darkening forest, with that thing still out there. Survival instinct kicked in. I tore strips from my shirt to bind my wounds as best I could, then forced myself to my feet. I had to move. I had to find help, but more than that, I had to warn others. Whatever this creature was, it was far more dangerous than anything these woods had seen before. As I stumbled through the forest, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The creature's howl echoed through the trees, sometimes sounding distant and sometimes terrifyingly close. I pushed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change my life forever. The forest at night is a different world. Shadows play tricks on your eyes, and every sound seems magnified. In my injured state, with that thing out there, it was a waking nightmare. I tried to orient myself to find a path back to civilization, but In the darkness, in my panic state, everything looked unfamiliar. The pain in my chest was a constant burning reminder of the danger I was in. I don't know how long I walked or in what direction. Time seemed to lose all meaning. But eventually I found myself in a small clearing, moonlight filtering through the canopy above. I leaned against a tree, trying to catch my breath and assess my situation. That's when I heard it, the snap of a branch too loud to be any small animal. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. Slowly, I turned my head, scanning the tree line. For a moment, nothing moved. Then I saw it, a flash of pale skin in the moonlight, those black eyes reflecting the dim light like pools of oil. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me with an almost curious tilt to its misshapen head. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my boots slipping on the damp forest floor. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its movements almost silent save for the occasional crack of a branch. My lungs burned, and the wound on my chest screamed with every step. The terror drove me onward. I scrambled up a steep incline, loose rocks skittering under my feet. At the top, I risked a glance back. The creature was there, effortlessly scaling the slope that had left me gasping. In the moonlight, I could see strings of saliva hanging from its crooked jaw. It let out that awful gurgling howl, the sound echoing through the trees. I turned and ran again, my mind racing as fast as my feet. I needed a plan, needed somewhere to hide or something to use as a weapon. But the forest offered no sanctuary, no convenient tools for survival. The chase continued, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Sometimes I thought I'd lost it, only to hear that bone-chilling howl again, always too close for comfort. My world narrowed to the pounding of my heart, the burn in my muscles, and the constant overwhelming need to keep moving. I bounced out of a thick stand of trees and found myself at the edge of a cliff below a river snaking through the valley, its water glinting in the moonlight. For a moment, I stood frozen, caught between the approaching creature and the long drop before me. The decision was made for me as the thing burst into view behind me. Without thinking, I leapt. The fall seemed to last forever. The wind rushed past me. Then it hit the water, the cold shock driving the air from my lungs. The current was strong, sweeping me downstream. I fought to keep my head above water, gasping for air. From the cliff above, I heard the creature's howl of frustration. I let the river carry me, too exhausted to fight against it. Eventually, I managed to grab onto a low-hanging branch and pull myself to the shore. I lay there on the riverbank, shivering and aching, but alive. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. The campsite, the bones, Dr. Reeves and the others, that creature. What was it? Where had it come from? And most importantly, how was I going to stop it? I knew I couldn't face this thing alone. I needed help. I needed to warn others about what was lurking in these woods. With renewed determination, I pushed myself to my feet. I had to find my way back. I had to tell my story. As I set off along the riverbank, I cast one last look at the dark forest behind me. Somewhere in those trees, that creature was still out there. And I had a sinking feeling that our paths would cross again. I don't know how long I walked along the riverbank. Hours blended together, marked only by the slow lightening of the sky as dawn approached. My clothes were soaked, my body ached, and the wound on my chest throbbed with every step. But I kept moving, driven by the need to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, I spotted something that made my heart leap. A cabin nestled in a small clearing near the river. It looked old and weathered, but at that moment, it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. I approached cautiously, years of training kicking in despite my exhaustion. The cabin appeared to be abandoned, with no signs of recent habitation. The door creaked as I pushed it open. revealing a Spartan interior. A few pieces of rustic furniture, a fireplace, and not much else. But it was shelter, and right now that was all that mattered. I barricaded the door as best I could, then collapsed onto a dusty old chair, my body finally giving into exhaustion. I must have dozed off because I woke with a start, my heart racing. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then it all came flooding back, the campsite, the bones, the creature. The noise outside snapped me fully awake. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, a soft thud like something heavy moving just outside the cabin. I moved silently to the window, peering out through a gap in the weathered boards. At first I saw nothing but the quiet forest. Then a movement caught my eye. Something large was moving through the trees, its pale form almost glowing in the early morning light. My heart hammered in my chest as I recognized the creature from the night before. It was circling the cabin, its movements unnaturally fluid for something of its size. I watched, hardly daring to breathe, as it paused near the door, its misshapen head tilting as if listening. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the creature slammed itself against the cabin wall. The whole structure shook, dust raining down from the rafters. I stumbled back, biting back a cry of surprise and pain as my injuries protested the sudden movement. Another slam, this time against the door. The barricade I'd hastily constructed groaned under the assault. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on an old axe propped in the corner, its handle worn smooth with age. As I grabbed the axe, I heard voices outside. My heart leapt. Could it be rescue? But as I turned back to the window, my hope turned to horror. Two hikers had wandered into the clearing, oblivious to the danger that lurked mere feet away. I wanted to shout a warning to tell them to run. But before I could make a sound, the creature burst into action. It moved with terrifying speed, covering the distance to the hikers in seconds. What followed was a scene of such violence that my mind still struggles to process it. The hikers never stood a chance. The creature tore into them with savage efficiency, its claws and teeth rending flesh and snapping bone. Their screams, mercifully brief, will haunt me for the rest of my days. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the wet sounds of the creature feeding. I stood frozen by the window, the axe clutched uselessly in my trembling hands. I had failed them, just as I had failed Dr. Reeves and the others. The creature finished its grisly meal and, to my horror, began to drag the remains back into the forest. It moved with an almost casual air, as if this were a routine it had performed countless times before. As it disappeared into the trees, I slumped to the floor, my mind reeling. The reality of my situation crashed down upon me. I was trapped, injured, with no way to call for help. But out there, that thing was still hunting. I don't know how long I sat there trying to process what I'd seen and figure out my next move. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. I had to find a way out, and to warn others about what was lurking in these woods. With grim determination, I gathered what supplies I could find in the cabin, some old canned food, a canteen, and a few matches. I fashioned a makeshift bandage for my chest wound using strips torn from a musty old curtain. Before I left, I scrawled a warning on the cabin wall using a piece of charcoal from the fireplace. Danger, monster in the woods. Stay away. There wasn't much, but maybe it would save someone else from stumbling into this nightmare. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the cabin door and stepped back into the forest. The creature was still out there somewhere, but I had to try to make it back to civilization. I had a story to tell, a warning to give, and maybe, just maybe, a monster to stop. The forest seemed different now, charged with a menace I'd never felt before in all my years as a ranger. Every shadow held the potential for danger. Every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. But I pushed on, driven by the need to warn others, and, if possible, put an end to the horror I'd witnessed. I tried to retrace my steps from the night before, but the chase and my subsequent river journey had left me disoriented. The sun overhead provided some guidance, but in the dense forest it was all too easy to lose my way. As I walked, my mind kept replaying the scenes I'd witnessed: the shredded tent, the arranged bones, Dr. Reeves falling to the creature's claws, the hikers being torn apart. It all seemed like a terrible nightmare, but the pain in my chest and the dried blood on my clothes were constant reminders of its reality. I don't know how long I'd been walking when I heard it. Voices, human voices, somewhere ahead. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by fear. What if the creature was nearby? What if I was leading it straight to more victims? I quickened my pace, moving as quietly as I could through the underbrush. As I got closer, I could make out two distinct voices, a man and a woman, their tones light and carefree. Tourists, probably up for a day hike with no idea of the danger they were in. I was about to call out to them when a familiar scent hit me, that sickly sweet odor of decay that I'd come to associate with the creature. My blood ran cold. It was close. I broke into a run, no longer caring about stealth. I burst into a small clearing to see a young couple, backpacks at their feet, consulting a map. They looked up at me in surprise, their expressions quickly turning to concern as they took in my battered appearance. "You need to run," I gasped out, my voice hoarse. "There's something in these woods. Something dangerous. We need to get out of here now." The man stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. "Whoa, easy there. What are you talking about? What happened to you?" Before I could answer, a long gurgling growl echoed through the trees. The couple's eyes widened in fear, and I saw the moment they realized this wasn't some crazy hermit's ramblings. "Run!" I shouted, already turning back the way I'd come. "Follow me." We took off through the forest, the sound of snapping branches and that terrible growl spurring us on. I led them down the path I'd just taken, hoping against hope that I could remember the way back to the cabin. It wasn't much, but it was the only defensible position I knew of. As we ran, I could hear the creature gaining on us. The woman stumbled, crying out in pain. Without breaking stride, the man scooped her up, carrying her as we continued our desperate flight. We burst out of the tree line, the cabin coming into view. "There," I shouted, pointing. "Get inside." We raced across the clearing, the sound of the creature crashing through the forest behind us growing louder by the second. I reached the door first, yanking it open and ushering the couple inside. As I turned to follow them, I caught a glimpse of pale, mottled skin and black, soulless eyes emerging from the trees. I slammed the door shut, throwing the makeshift barricade back in place. The cabin shuddered as the creature slammed into it, wood creaking in protest. The couple huddled in the corner, their eyes wide with terror. "What is that thing?" the woman whispered, her voice shaking. I shook my head, retrieving the axe from where I'd left it. "I don't know, but I've seen what it can do, and we need to find a way to stop it." As if in response to my words, the creature let out a bone-chilling howl. The assault on the cabin intensified, the walls shaking with each impact. I gripped the axe tighter, knowing that our barricade wouldn't hold forever. In that moment, as I stood facing the door, waiting for it to burst open and reveal the nightmare beyond, I made a decision. If we survived this, I would dedicate every remaining day of my life to hunting this thing down. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I would make sure that no one else would have to experience the horror I'd witnessed in these woods. The door began to splinter. I raised the axe, ready to face whatever came through. The real fight was about to begin. The memory of what happened next is a blur of violence and terror. The creature burst through the door in a shower of splinters, its massive form filling the small cabin. I swung the axe with all my might, feeling the shock reverberate up my arms as it connected with the thing's flesh. The couple screamed, and then, trying to shield the woman with his body, the creature's attention snapped to them, giving me an opening. I bowed the axe down again and again, my world narrowing to the rhythm of my swings and the creature's unearthly shrieks. I don't know how long the battle lasted. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually, miraculously, the creature retreated. It crashed back through the ruined door and disappeared into the forest, leaving behind a trail of ichor and the echoes of its pained howls. We stood in stunned silence for a long moment, hardly daring to believe it was over. The cabin was a wreck, splattered with blood both from the creature and our own. The couple were huddled in the corner, wide-eyed and shaking. I was still gripping the axe, my arms trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. It was the woman who broke the silence. Was it gone? I nodded slowly, finally lowering the axe. For now, but we need to get out of here. They'll be back. And we need to warn others. The next few hours passed in a haze. We made our way out of the forest, following the river until we reached a main road. A passing motorist stopped to help, shocked by our battered appearance. Before I knew it, we were at the ranger station, surrounded by concerned colleagues and skeptical law enforcement officers. I told my story every horrifying detail. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the sideways glances that questioned my sanity. But the couple backed me up, and the evidence of our injuries was hard to dismiss. A search party was organized, headed back into the woods to look for Dr. Reeves and the others. I wanted to go with them to face that thing again, but the doctors insisted I stay for treatment. My chest wound was worse than I'd realized, and the stress of the past day had taken its toll. As I lay in the hospital bed later that night, my mind raced. I knew that few would believe the full extent of what I'd seen. Already there was talk of a rabid bear or a mountain lion, some rational explanation to file away and forget. But I knew the truth. That thing was still out there, lurking in the shadows of Mount Shasta, and I had made a vow to stop it, no matter the cost. In the days and weeks that followed, life tried to return to normal. The search parties found no trace of Dr. Reeves or the others, just some scattered bones and the remains of our equipment. The official report cited an animal attack, case closed, but I couldn't let it go. I threw myself into research looking for any similar incidents, any folklore or legends that might shed light on what we encountered. I reached out to cryptozoologists, folklorists, anyone who might take my story seriously. Most nights I wake up in a cold sweat, the creature's howl echoing in my dreams. I've taken to keeping the axe by my bedside, a talisman against the darkness. Some might call it paranoia, but I call it preparedness. I'm still a ranger, still patrolling the forests of Mount Shasta, but now every hike is a hunt, every shadow holds the potential for danger, and every day I hope and fear in equal measure that I'll encounter that thing again, because next time I'll be ready. Next time I'll finish what I started in that cabin. For Dr. Reeves, for those hikers, for everyone who's fallen victim to this monster, I'll see this through to the end. The creature is still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness. And so am I, watching, waiting, ready to face the horror once more. This is my purpose now, my mission, and I won't rest until it's done. I never thought it would go down this way, but then again, whoever does. It was 2007, and I had spent the last 5 years as a search and rescue officer with the U.S. Forest Service based in the Kootenai National Forest. You'd think with a name like that, it would sound peaceful, but this patch of Montana has teeth, and I've seen them. Let me tell you, I didn't sign up for this job to wrestle with nightmares. I took it for the quiet. Funny how that works. My name's Leonard Wakefield. The other guys call me Wakes, like it's funny or something, but I don't mind. What I do mind is how we never seem to get enough credit for what we do out here. City people imagine us rescuing lost hikers, maybe the occasional campfire gone wrong. They don't know that out here, the trees hide more than just bad weather. They hide secrets, dangers, things that shouldn't exist but do. And sometimes those things get hungry. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. I remember because I was looking forward to my day off on Thursday, planning to catch up on sleep and maybe do some fishing. The call came in just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee, the bitter drink still coating my tongue. Wake's Diana's voice crackled over the radio. Diane ran dispatch, and her voice usually meant trouble. We've got a situation. Family from Idaho off the grid, weekend camping trip gone wrong. I sighed, already reaching for my gear. Let me guess, they went somewhere they shouldn't have. Bingo. Diane replied, one of those off-limits areas. You know the type. Yeah, I knew the type. Always looking for some secret trail. A spot no one else knows about. Makes people feel like explorers or something. Only you can call yourself an explorer when there's nothing left to explore. Everything out here already belongs to something. You just don't know what. Details, I asked, zipping up my jacket. Family of 4, parents, 2 kids. Supposed to be back Sunday night. It's Tuesday morning and no one's heard from them. Their car was spotted near the old logging road off Route 56. I knew the area. It was deep in the Kootenai, a place where the trees grew so thick they seemed to swallow the lights. A place where compasses sometimes went haywire and GPS signals faded to nothing. A place where things could happen and no one would ever know. I'm honest after grabbing my pack. Who's my partner for this one? Carl Duncan, Diane replied. He's already on his way to meet you. Carl, I couldn't help but smile a little. We'd known each other since high school and been partners for the last 3 years. He was one of those guys who could make a joke out of anything. Flat tire, bear chase, maybe even his own funeral. I liked that about him. It kept things light even when they weren't. As I headed out to the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. Or maybe it was the way the birds had stopped singing as if they knew something we didn't. I spotted Carl leaning against our old Jeep, lopsided grin on his face. Ready for another wild goose chase? He called out. More like a wild family chase, I replied, tossing my gear in the back. You hear the details? Carl nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. Yeah, it doesn't sound good. That area's been giving me the creeps lately. You heard about the weird tracks Johnson found last week? I hadn't, and Carl filled me in as we pulled out of the lot. Apparently, Johnson had come across some strange prints while on a routine patrol. Too big for a bear, wrong shape for a mountain lion. He couldn't identify them, and that was saying something for a guy with 20 years of experience. As we drove towards the old logging road, Carl kept talking about his weekend plans, something about a barbecue. I tried to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. The thing about the Kootenai, it's vast. Trees that reach up like they want to tear the sky open, valleys that swallow sound, and streams that run so fast you could scream and no one would hear it. That's the part they don't tell you in training. The quiet out here isn't peaceful. It's oppressive, like everything is listening, waiting for you to make a mistake. And as we turned onto the dirt road that would take us deep into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this time we might be the ones making the mistake. Little did I know as the trees closed in around us and the civilized world faded away that this would be the last normal conversation I'd have with Carl. That in a few hours everything I thought I knew about these woods, about the job, about the world itself would be turned upside down. That's the thing about the Kootenai. It doesn't give up its secrets easily, and some secrets, as I was about to find out, are better left buried in the dark heart of the forest. The old Jeep rattled and shook as we made our way deeper into the forest. You know the kind, smells like sweat and wet dog. It feels like it's gonna shake apart any second. But it was reliable, and out here, that's what counts. Crow kept up his chatter as we drove, but I found myself only half listening. My eyes were fixed on the tree line, watching for, well, I wasn't sure what. Something felt off, like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Hey, Wakes," Carl's voice cut through my thoughts. "You with me, buddy?" I blinked, realizing I'd been zoning out. "Yeah, sorry. Just thinking." Carl's face softened a bit. "About the Johnson thing?" I nodded. Those tracks have been bothering me more than I'd like to admit. "Do you ever wonder if there's stuff out here we don't know about, Carl? Things that shouldn't exist?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Colin, Wax, don't tell me you're buying into all that cryptid nonsense. Next thing you know, you'll be telling me Bigfoot's real." I didn't laugh. Instead, I pointed ahead. "We're here." The family's car sat abandoned near the service road, looking oddly out of place among the towering pines. As we pulled up beside it, the silence hit me. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just nothing. We got out, the door slamming shut with a finality that made me wince. Carl started examining the car while I surveyed the area. No signs of struggle, no obvious clues. Just an empty car in the looming forest. "Makes," Carl called, his voice tight. "You need to see this." I walked over and he pointed to the ground behind the car. There, barely visible in the soft earth, was a footprint. But not human and not any animal I recognized. It was huge, easily twice the size of my boot, with odd protrusions where the toes should be. "What the hell made that?" Carl whispered. I shook my head, a chill running down my spine. "I don't know, but I think we just found out what Johnson was talking about." We followed the tracks into the forest, the world growing darker and more impressive with each step. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. After about a mile, we found the family's campsite. The tent stood untouched, as if they'd just stepped out for a stroll, but the tracks told a different story. They were everywhere, circling the camp, overlapping like something had been playing with its prey. "I don't like this," Carl muttered, his usual joviality gone. "This isn't right." I nodded, my hand unconsciously moving to my sidearm. "Let's keep moving, they can't be far." But as we pressed on, following the chaotic trail of footprints, I couldn't help but wonder if we were walking into something we weren't prepared for. The Kootenai had always been wild, but this felt like something else entirely. The deeper we went into the forest, the more wrong everything felt. The air grew thick and stagnant, as if we were walking through invisible cobwebs. The silence was broken only by our labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. "Wakes," Carl's voice was barely above a whisper. "Look at the tree." I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. The bark on several nearby trees was scarred, deep gouges running vertically up the trunks, but it wasn't the marks themselves that sent a chill down my spine. It was their height. Whatever had made them was tall, unnaturally tall. "Could be a bear," I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. Carl shot me a look that said he wasn't buying it either. Since when do bears claw trees 15 feet up? We pressed on. The marked trees became more frequent. Some had what looked like symbols carved into them, crude, angular shapes that made my head hurt if I looked at them too long. The trail led us to a small clearing, and that's where we found the first real sign of the missing family. A child's backpack lay discarded on the ground, its contents strewn about as if it had been rifled through. As Carl knelt to examine it, I scanned the clearing. That's when I saw it. A scrap of fabric caught on a low-hanging branch. I moved closer, my heart pounding. It was a piece of a t-shirt, and it was stained dark with what could only be blood. "Carl," I called, my voice sounding strange in the oppressive silence. "I think we've got a problem." He joined me, his face paling as he saw the bloodied fabric. "Jesus, what the hell happened here?" Before I could respond, a sound echoed through the forest. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We both froze, our eyes darting around the clearing. "Please tell me that was your stomach," Carl whispered. I shook my head slowly, my hand moving to my gun. "We need to move, now." We set off at a brisk pace, no longer following the tracks, but simply trying to put distance between us and whatever had made that sound. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches clawing at our clothes, roots threatening to trip us with every step as we stumbled through the underbrush. I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows darting between trees, always just out of sight. I told myself it was just my imagination, the stress playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew better. We emerged into another clearing, both of us breathing hard. Carl leaned against a tree, wiping sweat from his brow. "What the hell is going on here?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat. There, at the edge of the clearing, was a sight that would haunt me for years to come. It was a deer, or what was left of one. The carcass hung from a tree, suspended by its own entrails. It wasn't the gore that struck me, it was the precision. This wasn't the work of a predator feeding, it was deliberate, almost artistic. Carl turned and promptly vomited. I couldn't blame him. The sight was revolting, yes, but it was more than that. It was wrong. Unnatural. A declaration of something that didn't belong in our world. As we stood there trying to process what we were seeing, that sound came again. The growl was louder this time, closer. And now I could hear something else beneath it, a rhythmic thudding, like heavy footsteps. "Run," I said, grabbing Carl's arm. "Run." We took off, crashing through the underbrush, no longer caring about stealth or tracking. Pure survival instinct took over. Behind us, the thudding grew louder and faster. Whatever was chasing us, it was gaining on us. As we ran, one thought kept repeating in my mind. We weren't the rescuers anymore. We were the prey. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. The sound of pursuit had faded, but neither of us wanted to risk stopping. Finally, we stumbled into a small ravine and collapsed behind a fallen log. "What? What was that?" Carl gasped between breaths. I shook my head, still trying to process what we'd seen. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not natural." We sat in silence for a few minutes, straining our ears for any sign of the creature. The forest remained quiet, but it was a tense silence full of malevolent anticipation. "We should call for backup," Carl said, reaching for his radio. I grabbed his wrist, stopping him. "And tell them what?" "That we're being chased by some monster no one's ever seen before. They'll think we've lost it." Carl's face hardened. "So what do we do?" He was right. As much as every instinct screamed at me to get out of these woods, we had a job to do. People were counting on us. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "We continue the search, but we stay alert. Any sign of trouble, we get out," agreed. Carl nodded, his face grim. We climbed out of the ravine, orientating ourselves before continuing in the direction we'd been heading before our panicked flight. The forest seemed different now. The trees loomed larger, their shadows deeper and more threatening. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. We'd been walking for about an hour when the smell hit us. It was a sickly sweet odor, the unmistakable stench of decay. Carl and I exchanged a look. We both knew what it meant, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Following the scent, we pushed through a dense thicket of undergrowth. As we emerged on the other side, the full horror of what we stumbled upon revealed itself. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a pile of discarded clothing mixed with something else. Then the details came into focus, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. It was a body, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, not by teeth or claws, but with surgical precision. Limbs are separated at the joints, organs carefully removed and arranged in a bizarre pattern around the corpse. Coral turned away, retching. I couldn't blame him. In all my years of search and rescue, I'd never seen anything like this. It wasn't just a kill, it was a display. Jesus Christ, Carl muttered, wiping his mouth. What could do something like this? Before I could answer, movement caught my eye. About 50 yards away, partially hidden by a large oak, was another body. This one was intact, but the way it was positioned, it was like a macabre puppet propped up against the tree trunk. We approached cautiously. As we got closer, I realized with horror that it was one of the children we'd been searching for, a boy no more than 10 years old. His eyes were open, staring blankly into the forest. Carl reached out and gently closed the child's eyes. "We need to get out of here. We need to get help." I nodded, unable to speak. The reality of our situation was crashing down on me. We were in way over our heads, facing something we couldn't begin to understand. As we turned to leave, a glint of something metallic caught my eye. There, half buried in the soft earth near the boy's body, was a small object. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was a pendant, crudely fashioned from what looked like iron. A symbol etched into its surface matched the strange markings we'd seen on the trees earlier. As I picked it up, a jolt of something ran through me. For a moment, the forest seemed to shift, the shadows deepening, the trees groaning as if in pain. Then it passed, leaving me dizzy and disoriented. "Wakes," Carl's voice seemed to come from far away. "Okay." I pocketed the pendant, my hand shaking slightly. "Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go." But as we made our way back towards where we'd left the Jeep, I couldn't shake the feeling that by taking that pendant, I'd set something in motion, something dark and ancient and hungry. And somewhere in the depths of the Kootenai, that rhythmic thudding began again, growing louder with each passing moment. The journey back to the Jeep was a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. The weight of the pendant in my pocket felt like an anchor, dragging me down into some dark, unknowable depth. Cole was uncharacteristically quiet, his usual jerks replaced by tense silence. I could see the fear in his eyes, the way he flinched at every snapping twig or rustle of leaves. We were about halfway back when we heard it again, that thudding sound like something heavy hitting the ground over and over. It wasn't fast, but rhythmic, almost hypnotic in its regularity. "Wakes," Carl whispered, his voice tight with fear. "What is that?" I shook my head, straining my ears to pinpoint the source of the sound. "I don't know, but it's getting closer." We picked up our pace, no longer trying to be quiet. The thudding grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like someone was dragging an anchor across a gravel pit, the noise bouncing off the trees and seeming to come from all directions at once. Suddenly, Carl grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. "Look," he hissed, pointing ahead. At first I couldn't see what he was indicating. Then between two massive pines, I caught a glimpse of movement, something large moving with an unnatural looping gait. It was there for just a second before disappearing behind the thick foliage, but that glimpse was enough to send ice through my veins. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion or anything else I'd ever seen in these woods. The proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long, body too thin, and the way it moved, it was like watching a puppet being manipulated by unseen string. "Run," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." We took off, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth or direction. All that mattered was putting distance between us and that thing. Behind us, The thudding increased in tempo, matching our frantic pace. Whatever was chasing us, it was fast, impossibly fast. We burst into a small clearing, both of us gasping for breath. Carl bent over, hands on his knees. I think we lost it, he panted. But even as the words left his mouth, I knew he was wrong. The forest had gone deathly quiet, that oppressive silence pressing in on us from all sides. And there at the edge of the clearing, I saw it. It was tall, easily 8 or 9 feet, its body a twisted amalgamation of human and animal features. Limbs bent at impossible angles, skin a mottled patchwork of fur and scales. It was the face that truly horrified me, a blank expanse of flesh with no eyes, no nose, just a gaping maw filled with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. For a moment, we all stood frozen. Cole and I rooted to the spot in terror, the creature swaying slightly as if moved by some unfelt breeze. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, it charged. "Move!" I screamed, shoving Carl towards the opposite side of the clearing. We ran. The creature's heavy footfalls shook the ground behind us. I risked glancing back and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was right on our heels, its mouth open in a silent roar. As I watched, one of its arms elongated, reaching for us with clawed fingers. "Duck!" I yelled to Carl, dropping to the ground. The creature's arm whistled over our heads, slamming into a nearby tree with enough force to splinter the trunk. We scrambled to our feet, using the moment of the creature's confusion to put some distance between us. But I knew we couldn't outrun it forever. We needed a plan, and fast. As we ran, an idea formed in my mind. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was all we had. "Carl," I gasped. "The ravine. We need to get back to the ravine." He nodded, understanding immediately. We changed course, heading for the steep-sided gully we had hidden in earlier. Behind us, the creature's thudding footsteps grew louder, closer. We reached the edge of the ravine just as I felt a rush of air behind me. Without thinking, I grabbed Carl and threw us both over the edge. We tumbled down the steep slope, a tangle of limbs and curses. As we hit the bottom, a deafening roar shook the air above us. I looked up to see the creature perched at the top of the ravine, its eyeless face seeming to stare right at us. For a moment, I thought it would leap down after us. But then, to my amazement, it began to back away. It paced back and forth at the edge of the ravine, making that terrible tearing metal sound. But it wouldn't come down. "It can follow us," Carl said, his voice filled with disbelief and relief. "Why can't it follow us?" I shook my head, not understanding it myself. Then I felt the pendant in my pocket, its weight suddenly noticeable. On a hunch, I pulled it out, holding it up. The creature recoiled as if struck, letting out a shriek that made my ears ring. Then, with one last baleful look in our direction, it retreated into the forest. Carl and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, our ragged breathing the only sound. Finally, Carl spoke, his voice shaky. What was that thing?" I shook my head, still staring at the pendant in my hand. "I don't know, but I think this might be protecting us somehow." "The pendant? Where'd you get that?" I explained about finding it near the boy's body and the strange sensation I'd felt when I picked it up. Carl listened, his face growing more concerned with each word. "Wakes, I think we're in over our heads here. We need to call for backup. Get out of these woods." He was right, of course. As I reached for my radio, my blood ran cold. It was gone, likely lost in our mad dash through the forest. "Damn it," I muttered. "Must have dropped it when we were running. What about yours?" Carl checked his belt, then swore his radio was missing too. We were alone, lost in a forest that seemed to be actively trying to kill us, with no way to call for help. The gravity of our situation hit me like a physical blow. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to get back to the Jeep. It's our only chance of getting out of here. Carlo nodded, his face pale but determined. Lead the way, partner. We climbed out of the ravine, every muscle screaming in protest. The forest was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet of nature. It was the tense silence of a predator lying in wait. I kept the pendant clutch tightly in my hand as we moved, hoping its strange protective properties would hold. Carl walked beside me, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. We had been walking for about an hour when Carl suddenly stopped, grabbing my arm. "Wakes?" he whispered. "Do you hear that?" I listened intently. At first I heard nothing but the usual forest sounds. Then I caught it. A faint rhythmic thumping in the distance. "It's back," I said, our heart racing. "We need to move fast." We picked up our pace, no longer caring about stealth. The thumping grew louder, closer. I could feel the vibrations in the ground beneath my feet. Suddenly, Coral went down. 1 second, he was walking beside me. The next, he was face first in the dirt. I rushed to him, thinking he had tripped, but when I rolled him over, I saw the blood. It was coming from his neck fast, too fast. And there, sticking out from the back of his neck, was a chunk of bone, not his, something else. I froze, my hands on him, but I didn't know what to do. There was no fixing this. Kyle tried to say something, but all that came out was a wet gurgle. And then he was gone. I didn't even have time to process it when I heard the sound again. The thudding. Only now it wasn't rhythmic. It was fast, and it was coming right for me. I ran. I don't remember how far or how long. All I know is I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed behind a fallen tree. I couldn't see it, whatever it was, but I could feel it. It was out there, circling, waiting for me to make a mistake. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening. The thudding came and went, getting close, then farther away. I held my breath every time it neared. My body was shaking, my hands caked in Carmel's blood, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Then, out of nowhere, the sound stopped. Just like that. I waited, still frozen, until I was sure it was gone. When I finally stood up, I didn't go back for Carl. I couldn't. I made my way in what I hoped was the direction of the Jeep. The pendant clutched so tightly in my hand that its edges cut into my palm. Night was falling, the forest growing darker by the minute. I knew I should stop, find shelter, wait for daylight, but the thought of spending a night in these woods with that thing out there was unbearable, so I pressed on, using the dim light of my flashlight to navigate. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. More than once I caught glimpses of something large moving just at the edge of my light's reach. As the hours wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. My movements became sluggish, my thoughts muddled. I found myself stumbling more often, each fall sending jolts of panic through me as I scrambled back to my feet. It was during one of these moments that I picked myself up from yet another fall that I saw it. There, carved into the trunk of a massive oak, was a symbol, the same symbol that was on the pendant. I approached cautiously, running my fingers over the rough etching. As I did, I felt a surge of something. Energy, power. I couldn't name it, but suddenly my exhaustion lifted, my mind clearing. I looked around, really looking for the first time in hours, and I realized I recognized where I was. The Jeep couldn't be more than a mile away. Filled with renewed determination, I set off. The forest seemed less oppressive now, the shadows less threatening. I could still feel the presence of the creature, but it felt more distant, as if held at bay by some unseen force. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw it. The old Jeep, sitting exactly where we'd left it, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I ran the last few yards, fumbling with the keys. As I yanked open the door, a roar split the night. I turned to see the creature, its monstrous form silhouetted against the trees. Without thinking, I hurled the pendant at it. A small piece of metal arced through the air, glinting in the moonlight. As it struck the creature, there was a flash of blinding light and a sound like thunder. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. Where it had started was nothing but scorched earth and a faint wisp of smoke. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I jumped into the Jeep, started the engine, and tore out of there as fast as the old vehicle could manage. I didn't stop driving until I reached the ranger station. By then the sky was lightening with the first hints of dawn. I stumbled out of the Jeep, my story pouring out in a jumbled mess to the startled night staff. They didn't believe me, of course. How could they? I could hardly believe it myself. They chalked it up to trauma, exhaustion, maybe even a bear attack. Yeah, right, that wasn't a bear. Search parties were sent out. They found what was left of Carl and the family. But there was no sign of the creature, no evidence of anything out of the ordinary. Just another tragic accident in the unforgiving wilderness. I quit a week later and never set foot in those woods again. But sometimes on quiet nights I can still hear it. That rhythmic thudding like something heavy dragging across the forest floor. I don't know what it was we encountered in the Kootenai that day. Some ancient predator, a creature from another dimension, or something our minds simply couldn't comprehend. All I know is this. If you're ever out in those woods and you hear something heavy thudding in the distance, don't wait around to find out what it is. Run and pray it doesn't catch you. Because out there in the dark heart of the forest, there are things that shouldn't exist. Things with teeth and claws and a hunger that can never be satisfied. And sometimes, just sometimes, they get hungry for something more than deer and rabbits. So if you go into the Kootenai, be careful. Watch the shadows. Listen for that thudding sound. And if you see a strange symbol carved into a tree or find an old iron pendant, leave it be. Some secrets are better left buried in the dark heart of the forest, and some horrors are best left unawakened. As for me, I left the search and rescue life behind, found a nice quiet job in the city, but I never forgot what happened in those woods. And I never stopped looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that eyeless face staring back at me. Because once you've seen what lurks in the shadows of the Kootenai, you never really escape. You just learn to live with the knowledge that out there somewhere it's still waiting, still hunting. And sooner or later, it might just find you. When you've been a park ranger for as long as I have, 14 years, you start to believe you've seen just about everything the wilderness can throw at you. Well, that was until August 1996 in Washington's Olympic National Park. And Felix Munson, park ranger for the last 14 years. Give or take a few months off here and there when I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd seen enough of the woods. Turns out the woods hadn't seen enough of me. The Olympics are a vast stretch of land with towering pines that seem to climb into the sky and fog that rolls in so thick you'd think you're on the set of a bad slasher film. I've always liked it that way. It's peaceful, the kind of place where you can find a bit of quiet. Usually it's the kind of place where things don't seem real unless you see them up close. And by then it's probably too late. That fateful morning I was stationed at the rainforest section. A sprawling, dense expanse where trees block out most of the sunlight and you lose track of time quickly. It's the kind of place that swallows sound, making you feel like you're the only thing moving for miles. I was supposed to check on some campers who hadn't reported back. People are missing out here from time to time, but 99% of the time it's because they got lost or underestimated the terrain. Still, this group hadn't checked in for days, and something felt off. There were 4 of them, 3 men and a woman. They'd said they were experienced hikers. I figured they probably just lost their signal or maybe extended their trip without letting us know. Standard stuff. I didn't expect to find what I did. As I set out that morning, the mist clung to the forest floor, weaving between the massive trunks of ancient trees. The air was thick with moisture, and the only sounds were the occasional drip of water from leaves and the crunch of my boots on the damp earth. I'd done this trek 100 times before, but today something felt different. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. I checked my gear one last time. Radio, first aid kit, flashlight, and my trusty Swiss Army knife. Standard issue stuff, really. Nothing that would prepare me for what was coming. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the canopy above grew denser, filtering the sunlight into a green-tinged twilight. Time seemed to slow down, and each step felt heavier than the last. About an hour into my hike, I came across the first sign that something was amiss: a candy wrapper partially buried in the mud. Now, littering isn't uncommon, unfortunately, but this wrapper was torn to shreds as if something had been frantically searching for the last morsel of food. I frowned, pocketing the remains. It could have been an animal, I told myself, but a nagging feeling in my gut said otherwise. As I pressed on, the forest grew quieter, no birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if all life had suddenly decided to hold its collective breath. I've been in these woods long enough to know that when nature goes silent, it's usually because something's wrong. I tried my radio, hoping to check in with base camp, but all I got was static. Not unusual in these parts, given the dense foliage and mountainous terrain, but it did nothing to ease the growing sense of unease in my stomach. As the dawn wore on and the forest grew darker, I began to wonder if I should turn back, but the thought of those missing hikers kept me going. What if they were injured or lost? I couldn't leave them out here, not with night approaching and temperatures set to drop. Little did I know, as I pushed deeper into the heart of the whole rainforest, that I was walking into a nightmare, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it, one that would leave scars, both physical and mental, that I'd carry with me for the rest of my life. The forest may have been silent, but something was out there, watching, waiting, and I was about to come face to face with a horror beyond imagination. About half a mile from where the group's campsite was supposed to be, I found the first real clue that something had gone terribly wrong. A backpack, half buried in mud, looked like it had been torn apart by something big. Too big for a bear, which ruled out the usual suspect. I approached cautiously, my senses on high alert. The backpack was a high-end model, the kind serious hikers invest in, but there it was little more than shredded fabric and bent metal frames. As I knelt to examine it, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The damage wasn't consistent with any animal attack I'd ever seen. The tears were too precise, almost surgical, in their execution. I scanned the surrounding area, hoping to spot the group's trail, or at least something to tell me what had happened. There was nothing but silence and that same eerie feeling you get when you realize the woods are watching you. Maybe it's a ranger thing, but when the forest is quiet like that, it's never a good sign. As I stood up, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the fading light. I moved closer and felt my blood run cold. It was a hunting knife, its blade coated in a dark, rusty substance that I prayed wasn't what I thought it was. The handle was warped, as if it had been subjected to immense pressure. What kind of force could do that to hardened steel? I pocketed the knife, my mind racing. This was no ordinary missing persons case. Something violent had happened here, something I wasn't equipped to handle alone. I reached for my radio again, desperate to call for backup, but the static seemed even louder now, almost mocking. Stilling myself, I pushed further into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and more than once I spun around, certain I'd seen something move. It was then that I came across their tent, or what was left of it. The thing looked shredded, like it had been torn apart with malice, like something had been angry. That's when I noticed the blood. Not a lot at first, just enough to paint a sickening picture in my head. Dark stains marred the torn fabric, and a trail of droplets led away from the campsite. My training kicked in, but I found myself following the grim path, even as every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The blood trail led me to a small clearing, and there, in the fading light of day, I saw something that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. A single hiking boot, size 11, lying on its side. But it wasn't empty. A foot was still inside, severed cleanly at the ankle. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. This was beyond anything I'd ever encountered. No animal I knew of could do this. This was calculated, almost intelligent in its cruelty. As the demonization of what I was dealing with began to sink in, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I rolled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. For a split second, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the light, too high up to be any normal forest creature. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. My heart pounding, I knew I had a choice to make: continue on and potentially face whatever had done this, or retreat and come back with reinforcements. But could I live with myself if I left now, knowing there might be survivors counting on me? With shaking hands, I checked my watch. The sun would be setting soon, and I knew that whatever was out there, it would have the advantage in the dark. I had to move quickly if I was going to find any answers or survivors. Little did I know, as I steeled myself to press on, that the true horrors of the whole rainforest were just beginning to reveal themselves, and I was walking right into their waiting arms. I pushed on, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness like a lifeline. The forest had taken on a different character now. The once majestic trees loomed ominously, their shadows seeming to reach out with grasping fingers. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. It was then that I found them, two bodies, or what was left of them, maybe 15 minutes deeper into the woods. One of the guys, or what was left of him, was sprawled out near a down log, his torso torn open like some kind of macabre display. His face was gone, completely gone, as if something had just ripped it off. The other was the woman. She wasn't any better off, but at least she still had a face, if you could call that mercy. Her limbs were bent at unnatural angles, and deep gashes crisscrossed her body, but it was her eyes that got to me, wide open, frozen in a look of pure terror. Whatever she had seen in her final moments, it was beyond anything a human should ever have to witness. Now I've seen some messed up things in these woods, but this wasn't natural. No animal I've ever come across does this, not even the mountain lions, and trust me, they're as close to vicious as it gets out here. I wanted to puke. Hell, I nearly did, but something kept me grounded. Probably the sheer disbelief of it all. As I forced myself to examine the scene more closely, trying to detach myself emotionally like I'd been trained to do, I noticed something odd. The wounds weren't consistent with any animal attack I'd ever seen. Some were jagged and torn, yes, but others were almost surgical in their precision. And the positioning of the bodies, it was almost like they'd been arranged, displayed for maximum shock value. Whatever did this wasn't hunting for food, it was killing for sport, or maybe worse. I was about to turn back to radio for immediate backup, and probably a whole damn SWAT team, when I heard something, branches breaking, heavy, deliberate steps in the underbrush. They weren't human steps, they were too heavy, too uneven. I should have left right then and there. Every ounce of training, every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run. But curiosity's got a way of turning a bad situation into a worse one. I took out my flashlight, the kind that doubles as a blunt object when necessary, and slowly made my way toward the sound. The forest seemed to close in around me, the darkness became almost solid. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. As I rounded a massive old-growth tree, my light fell upon a scene that will be forever burned into my memory. I've regretted a lot of things in my life, but nothing like turning that corner. It was there, hunched over the remains of one of the hikers, picking at him as if he were an afterthought. Its arms were long and sinewy, covered in a patchwork of dark fur and something that looked like scales. Its body was a grotesque fusion of features that shouldn't exist together. Part primate, part reptile, and part something else entirely. But it was its face that sent ice through my veins. Its mouth, if you could call it that, was wide, far too wide, lined with teeth that looked like they belonged on a shark. But it wasn't the teeth that got me, it was the way it used them. This thing wasn't just eating, it was playing, tearing off chunks, then tossing them aside as if it were bored, like it needed something else to satisfy whatever sick craving it had. And its eyes, God, its eyes. They were intelligent, curious, almost amused. For a moment I froze. You'd think survival instinct would kick in, but instead my brain just checked out. There was no fight or flight, just staring. Maybe it was shocked. Or maybe I thought if I didn't move, it wouldn't notice me. Well, it turns out that was stupid. It noticed me alright. One of its limbs jerked up suddenly, and in an instant it was on me. I didn't even have time to raise my flashlight before it swiped at my chest, knocking me back into the mud. Pain shot through me, and I realized it had ripped my shirt open, leaving 4 deep gashes across my torso. Adrenaline surged through me, and somehow I managed to scramble to my feet. I swung the flashlight wildly, more out of desperation than any real strategy. I must have hit something because it let out this low, vibrating noise, almost like it was annoyed rather than hurt. I didn't wait to see if I could get a second swing in. I ran fast, probably the fastest I'd ever run in my life, and I'm not a sprinter. I can hear behind me crashing through the trees, tearing at the foliage like it wasn't used to anything, putting up a fight. But somehow I managed to stay ahead of it, just barely. The forest was a blur of shadows and branches whipping past my face. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to get away, to find some kind of safety. As I ran, one thought kept repeating in my mind. This can't be real. This can't be happening. But the pain in my chest and the sound of that thing pursuing me told a different story. This was all too real and I was living it. Little did I know my nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning and my legs screaming for rest. But the sound of that thing behind me, the memory of what it had done to those hikers, kept me going long past the point where I should have collapsed. Finally, mercifully, I stumbled into a small clearing, and the sun touched on an old fire lookout tower, long abandoned but still standing. It was a relic from a bygone era, but right then it looked like salvation. I scrambled up the rickety stairs, taking them 2 at a time, praying they would hold under my weight. As I reached the top, I slammed the trapdoor shut behind me and slumped against the wall, gasping for air. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and my ragged breathing. Then, slowly, the sounds of the forest began to filter in. But they were wrong somehow, distorted like the whole world had been twisted just a few degrees off normal. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I took stock of my situation. The lockout was bare except for an old chair and a dusty desk. Cupboards hung in the corners, and the windows were grimy with years of neglect. But it was shelter, and right then, that was all that mattered. I checked my wounds, wincing as my fingers probed the gashes on my chest. They were deep, but the bleeding had slowed. I used what was left of my shirt to fashion a makeshift bandage, gritting my teeth against the pain. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full weight of what I'd seen came crashing down on me, those bodies torn apart like they were nothing. And that creature, what the hell was it? In all my years as a ranger, I'd never even heard whispers of anything like it. I tried my radio again, desperate for any kind of connection to the outside world. But all I got was static, punctuated by strange guttural noises that made my skin crawl. It was as if something were interfering with the signal, twisting it into something unrecognizable. As I sat there trying to gather my thoughts and form some kind of plan, a noise from outside froze me in place. It was a low, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, but far too deep, far too menacing to belong to any normal animal. I crept to the window, my heart in my throat. Through the grime-covered glass, I could just make out movement at the edge of the clearing. Something large was circling the tower, staying just out of clear sight. Every so often, I catch a glimpse of a limb or the flash of those terrible eyes reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the canopy. It knew I was here. It was toying with me, like a cat with a mouse. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, at the base of the tower, was a small pile of objects, personal effects from the hikers, a watch, a locket, a wallet, and atop this grim collection was a ranger's badge, my badge. The message was clear. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't just some mindless beast. It was intelligent, calculating, and for some reason it had decided to make this forest its hunting ground. As the night wore on, I huddled in that old lookout, jumping at every sound, every shadow. The creature circled below, sometimes letting out a bone-chilling purr, sometimes falling silent for long stretches that were almost worse. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, but the thought of venturing back into those woods with that thing out there was almost too much to bear. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I steeled myself for what I knew I had to do. I had to get back to base to warn others about what was out here. But more than that, I had to find a way to stop this thing before it claimed any more victims. Little did I know my ordeal was far from over. The horrors I'd witnessed were just the beginning, and the Olympic National Park was about to become a battleground between man and nightmare-made flesh. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I made my move. I crept down the tower stairs, every creak of wood sending my heart racing. The clearing was empty now, with no sign of the creature that had stalked me through the night. But I knew better than to think it had given up. I set out in what I hoped was the direction of the ranger station, my senses on high alert. The forest felt different now, charged with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep from the very ground. Every snapping twig and every rustle of leaves had me spinning around, expecting to see those terrible eyes and gnashing teeth. As I walked, I tried to piece together what I knew this creature, whatever it was, had been methodically hunting in these woods. The arranged bodies, the collected trophies, this wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. This was something with intelligence, with purpose. About an hour into my trek, I came across another grisly scene. This time it was a pair of hikers I didn't recognize. Their bodies were fresher than the others, couldn't have been more than a day old. But the method was the same, torn apart and displayed like some sick art installation. I forced myself to examine the scene, looking for any clues that might help me understand what I was dealing with. That's when I noticed something odd. Among the scattered belongings was a camera, somehow untouched by the carnage around it. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It was one of those instant cameras, the kind that spits out the photo right away. There were several pictures already developed, mostly typical vacation shots, smiling faces against beautiful forest backdrops. But the last photo made my blood run cold. It showed a shadowy figure in the distance, half hidden behind a tree. It was blurry and out of focus, but there was no mistaking those elongated limbs or that wide, toothy maw. The creature had been stalking them, playing with them, long before it attacked. I pocketed the camera, evidence, I told myself. Through who I thought would believe me, I couldn't say. As I continued on, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees looked wrong somehow, their bark twisted into grotesque patterns and their branches reached out like grasping hands. More than once I caught glimpses of movement just at the edge of my vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. It was playing with me, I realized, hurting me. But towards what, I couldn't begin to guess. As the day wore on, I found myself at the edge of a small ravine. The bottom was shrouded in mist, and I could hear the faint sound of running water. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. That's when I heard a scream, distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere down in that misty canyon, human, desperate, terrified. I knew it could be a trap. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn back to get help. But I couldn't shake the thought that someone else might be out here, someone who needed my help. Taking a deep breath, I began to make my way down the steep slope. The mist swirled around my feet, thick and cloying, smelling faintly of decay. With every step, I felt like I was descending into another world, one where the rules of nature no longer applied. As I reached the bottom, the screaming stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, straining my ears for any sound, any clue. Then from somewhere in the mist ahead of me, I heard a low, rumbling chuckle. A sound no human throat could make. I realized too late that I had walked right into its trap. The mist swirled around me, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. That inhuman chuckle seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around trying to pinpoint its source, but the sound just kept shifting, toying with me. Suddenly the mist parted and there it was. The creature stood before me in all its horrifying glory. In the daylight, I could see details I'd missed before. Its skin was a patchwork of fur, scales, and something that looked disturbingly like human flesh. Its eyes were a deep, swirling black, like looking into the void itself. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that truly terrified me. This wasn't just some mindless beast. There was calculation there, curiosity, and something that looked disturbingly like amusement. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I knew I should run, fight, do something. But I was frozen in place, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then it spoke. Its voice was a guttural growl, but the words were clear, unmistakably English. Felix Munson, it said, my name rolling off its tongue like it was savoring the taste. I've been waiting for you. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How did it know my name? How could it speak? 1,000 questions raced through my head, but all I could manage was a choked, "What are you?" It tilted its head, regarding me with those bottomless eyes. I'm the thing that lurks in the shadows of your nightmares. I am the whisper in the dark that makes you question your sanity. I am evolution's next step, and you, Felix Munson, are my prey. With shocking speed, it lashed out, its clawed hand catching me across the chest. I felt a searing pain as its talons ripped through flesh and muscle. I stumbled back, gasping, feeling warm blood soaking through my shirt. Adrenaline surged through me, finally breaking the paralysis of fear. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, no longer caring about stealth or direction. All that mattered was getting away from that thing. I could hear it behind me, that terrible chuckle echoing through the trees. It was toying with me, I realized. It could have caught me at any time, but it was drawing out the chase, savoring my fear. As I ran, the forest seemed to twist and change around me. Trees appeared where there should have been none. Paths I thought I recognized led to unfamiliar places. It was as if the very landscape was conspiring with the creature, trying to keep me trapped. I didn't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish chase. But eventually I burst out of the tree line and found myself back at the ranger station. For a moment, hope surged through me. Safety and help were just steps away. But as I staggered toward the building, I realized something was wrong. The station was dark and silent. In there on the porch was a familiar, terrifying sight. A small pile of personal effects. Badges, walkie-talkies, car keys. My colleagues, my friends had already fallen victim to the creature. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by despair and exhaustion. The creature emerged from the tree line behind me, its footsteps slow and deliberate. It knew it had won. As it approached, I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But instead, I felt its hot breath on my ear as it leaned in close. "The game isn't over yet, Felix Munson," it growled. "Run, hide, gather your strength. Because when the sun sets, we begin again. And this time, I won't be so merciful." When I opened my eyes, it was gone. But I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. And I knew that when night fell, the real horror would begin. As darkness fell over the Olympic National Park, I barricaded myself inside the ranger station. I gathered what supplies I could find: first aid kit, flashlights, a flare gun, and a hunting rifle that one of my colleagues kept locked in his desk. It wasn't much, but it was all I had to face the long night ahead. I tried the radio again, desperately calling for help. But all I got was that same twisted static. It was as if the entire world beyond these woods had ceased to exist. As the hours ticked by, I found myself jumping at every sound, every shadow. The creature's words echoed in my mind. "When the sun sets, we begin again." What sick game did it have planned? Around midnight, the attack began. It started subtly at first, scratching sounds at the windows, whispers just on the edge of hearing. Then came the banging, so loud it shook the entire building. The creature was toying with me, testing my defenses. Looking for weaknesses, I huddled in the center of the room, rifle clutched to my chest, my eyes darting from window to window. Occasionally I'd catch a glimpse of those terrible eyes peering in at me, that wide mouth stretched in a grotesque parody of a smile. As dawn approached, the attacks grew more frenzied. The creature hurled itself against the doors and windows with inhuman strength. Wood splintered, glass cracked. I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke through. In desperation, I fired the rifle at one of the windows where I'd seen its face. The shot went wide, but the creature retreated, if only for a moment. In the brief respite, I noticed something I'd overlooked before: an old trapped door in the floor, leading to what I assumed was some kind of cellar or storm shelter. With the sound of splintering wood filling my ears, I wrenched open the trapdoor and descended into the darkness below. I pulled the door shut just as I heard the creature burst into the room above. The cellar was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and decay. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized I wasn't alone down here. Shapes loomed in the shadows, bodies. I realized with growing horror. My missing colleagues, other victims of the creature's hunt, all perfectly preserved as if they'd only just died. But it was what was scrawled on the walls that truly chilled me to my core. Equations, diagrams, notes, and a handwriting I didn't recognize. It spoke of experiments, of blending DNA from multiple species, of pushing the boundaries of evolution itself. This creature wasn't just some freak of nature. It was engineered, created for some insane purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. As I stood there trying to process what I was seeing, I heard the trapdoor above me creak open. A cold hand reached down, followed by that nightmarish face. "Found you," it growled, its mouth stretching into that terrible grin. In that moment, faced with certain death, something in me snapped. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was the revelations of the cellar, or maybe it was just the sheer absurdity of my situation. Whatever it was, I found myself laughing, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that echoed off the damp walls. The creature paused, seeming taken aback by my reaction. In that split second of confusion, I raised the flare gun I'd been clutching and fired directly into its face. The cellar exploded into blinding light and acrid smoke. The creature reeled back, shrieking in pain and fury. I used the distraction to scramble up the ladder, shoving past the thrashing monster and out into the pre-dawn light. I ran, not caring where I was going, just knowing I had to put distance between myself and that abomination. As I crashed through the underbrush, my mind raced, trying to piece together what I'd seen in the cellar. The creature wasn't just hunting for sport or food. It was conducting some kind of twisted experiment using Olympic National Park as its personal laboratory. But why? What was its endgame? As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, I found myself back at the old fire lookout tower. Without thinking, I climbed up and collapsed on the floor as exhaustion finally overtook me. When I awoke, it was full daylight. For a moment, I thought perhaps it had all been a nightmare, but the pain in my chest and dried blood on my clothes told me otherwise. I looked out over the forests, trying to spot any sign of the creature, but all seemed peaceful. Then something caught my eye, a plume of smoke rising in the distance from the direction of the ranger station. Curiosity overrode caution, and I made my way back. As I approached, I saw that the station had been reduced to ashes, and there in the midst of the destruction was a message scorched into the earth. "The game has changed, Felix Munson. You've proven yourself a worthy adversary, but this is bigger than you know. The next move is yours." I stood there staring at the message as the full weight of my situation sank in. This wasn't over. The creature was still out there, and now it saw me not as prey, but as a player in whatever sick game it was orchestrating. I knew I had choices to make. I could try to leave and alert the outside world to what was happening here, but would anyone believe me? And could I live with myself if I abandoned others to this fate? Or I could stay, try to uncover the truth behind the creature's origins and purpose. But that path led into darkness I wasn't sure I was prepared to face. As I stood there, the sun climbing higher in the sky, I realized that the Olympic National Park had become more than just my workplace. It was now a battleground, a place where the laws of nature had been twisted and broken. And I, Felix Munson, park ranger and reluctant hero, was the only thing standing between this abomination and the unsuspecting world beyond these woods. Whatever choice I made, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The horrors I'd witnessed, the truths I'd uncovered, had changed me irrevocably. And as I took my first steps towards an uncertain future, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, much darker story. The Olympic National Park had always been a place of mystery and wonder. Now it was a place of nightmares made flesh, and I was trapped right in the middle of it all. A reluctant player in a game where the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. As I walked away from the smoldering ruins of the ranger station, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever horrors awaited me in the depths of these woods, I knew I couldn't turn back now. The hunt was on, and this time I wasn't the prey, I was the hunter. And somewhere out there in the shadows of the forest, that creature was waiting for me to make my move. I grew up in a town so small that even the post office forgot we existed sometimes. There's not much to say about Clear Lake, Iowa. You're either born here, grow old here, or you're passing through on your way to a place that doesn't have a population sign in double digits. I'm Todd Casey. Been the sheriff here for about 7 years, although some folks still call me the kid because I was just 28 when I took over the badge. My dad used to be the sheriff before me, but he had the good sense to retire and move to Florida with my mom, leaving me with a coffee maker that barely works and a station that looks like it's been stuck in the 80s since, well, the 80s. Clear Lake isn't the kind of place where much happens. Most days, my job consists of breaking up the occasional bar fight at the Clear Lake Tavern or chasing off teenagers who think it's funny to tip cows. The most excitement we've had in years was when Old Man Wilkins' tractor went haywire and plowed through his own fence, ending up in the middle of Main Street. There's something about this town that gets under your skin. Maybe it's the way the corn seems to whisper secrets when the wind blows just right, or how the fog rolls in off the lake some mornings, thick enough to make you forget there's a world beyond its banks. Whatever it is, Clear Lake has a way of holding on to people even when they swear they're going to leave. I never thought I'd be one of those people. After high school, I had big plans. I was going to join the state police, maybe even the FBI, but then my dad got sick and somebody had to step up. So I stayed, went through the academy, and before I knew it, I was wearing the same badge my old man had worn for 30 years. It was 2003, back in May. You'd think things would slow down in spring, but I always felt like trouble had a knack for crawling out from under rocks just as the snow melted. Clear Lake was sleepy, sure, but every now and then something would pop off. Usually it was kids messing around or old-timers getting into it over property lines that haven't moved in 50 years, but this one was different. It started with a missing persons call. Nothing unusual at first, but looking back I should have known. Should have felt it in my bones that something wasn't right. Because in a town like Clear Lake, where everybody knows everybody's business, people don't just disappear. They don't vanish into thin air without leaving a trace. And yet that's exactly what happened. And that's just the beginning of a nightmare that would change Clear Lake forever. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. I remember because I was nursing my second cup of coffee, trying to wake up after a late night dealing with a domestic dispute that turned out to be nothing more than a raccoon knocking over trash cans. The phone rang and I picked it up expecting Mrs. Lawson complaining about her neighbor's dog again. Instead, I heard the gruff voice of Mr. Johnson, one of the only farmers still working his land out on the north side of town. He's in his 70s now, stubborn as a mule and refuses to give up his fields even though his kids have all moved out to bigger places with actual opportunities. Sheriff Casey, he said, his voice tight with concern. I think we might have a problem out here. I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. What kind of problem, Mr. Johnson? He hesitated, and I could almost see him tugging at his warm cap, a habit he had when he was worried. It's Jim McCarty. Nobody's seen him in a few days. Now, Jim McCarty going missing for a few days wasn't exactly front-page news. The man had a tendency to disappear on benders, usually after one too many at the Clear Lake Tavern, but something in Johnson's voice made me pause. You sure he's not just sleeping one off? I asked, though I already knew the answer. That's what I thought at first, Johnson replied. But it's different this time. His truck's still in the driveway and the sheep, they're still penned up. That got my attention. McCarty might neglect a lot of things when he was on a bender, but never his animals. He treated those sheep better than most people treated their kids. And there's something else, Johnson continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The sheep, they're acting strange, huddled in the far corner of the barn like they've seen a ghost. I've never seen anything like it. I felt a chill run down my spine, though I couldn't say why. All right, Mr. Johnson, I'll swing by after lunch and check it out. You might want to come sooner, Sheriff, he said, a note of urgency in his voice. There's something not right about this. I can feel it. I should have listened to him, should have dropped everything and gone right then. But in a town like Clear Lake, where the most exciting thing to happen in years was a runaway tractor, it's easy to get complacent. Easy to think that nothing truly bad could ever happen here. I'll be there as soon as I can, I assured him, already planning to finish up some paperwork before heading out. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just Johnson's words, but the way he said them, the fear in his voice. In all the years I'd known him, I'd never heard Mr. Johnson sound scared. I tried to push the feeling aside, tell myself it was nothing. Just an old drunk who'd wandered off and would turn up eventually, probably sleeping it off in a ditch somewhere. But deep down I knew. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. I just didn't know how right I was. The drive out to McCory's farm took me past miles of cornfields that stretched like a green ocean. It's peaceful in a way that makes you forget there's a world beyond it. But as I got closer to McCordy's property, that peace began to feel oppressive, like the corn was closing in, watching. I pulled up to the farm around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was high, beating down on the weathered barn and the single-story house that looked like it might cave in any second. McCarty had never been one for home improvements. As soon as I stepped out of the cruiser, I knew something was wrong. The wind was unusually still, not a whisper through the grass. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet where someone's asleep inside, but the kind where you swear you're the last person alive for miles. I approached the house, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway. McCarty's old pickup was there, just like Johnson had said. I knocked on the door, no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. "Jim, it's Sheriff Casey." "You in there?" Nothing. The door creaked open under my fist, and I felt my hand instinctively move to my holster. Every instinct I had screamed to back away, to call for backup. They'd be bringing a dog. But I figured it was just McCarty, probably passed out drunk inside. I stepped into the house, and the smell hit me like a physical force. It was the kind of stench that makes your eyes water and your stomach turn, like something had died and been left to rot in the summer heat. The place was trashed, but McCarty wasn't exactly known for his housekeeping. Beer bottles, old magazines, and papers were scattered across the floor, but there was something about the chaos that felt wrong. It wasn't the usual mess of a man living alone, it looked like there had been a struggle. I moved through the house, calling out for McCarty. Each room was empty. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the creak of floorboards under my feet. Then I noticed the basement door. It was ajar, and that same sour stench seemed to be coming from down there. Now, every small-town cop knows not to get involved in things they can't handle. But pride, you see, is a funny thing. It makes you think you're invincible, especially when you've been sheriff for years without so much as a parking ticket going sideways. I flicked on my flashlight and headed down the creaking stairs. At first I thought maybe he'd fallen, hit his head, or, God forbid, was dead. But when I got to the bottom, what I saw made my blood run cold. There was no McCarty, but there were tracks, deep gouges in the dirt floor, like something had been dragged across it. Something heavy, and next to them were bones. Not sheep bones, not the kind you find scattered in the woods after a fox has gotten to a stray animal. These were human, small, scattered like someone had just tossed them aside. Forgotten. I crouched down inspecting the bones, my flashlight trembling slightly. They were old, sure, but there was something wrong about them. Some had bite marks, and not from any animal I could recognize. Too jagged, too deliberate. That's when I heard it. A noise, not a creak. Not a groan of an old house settling, but a shuffling sound. Like something scraping against the dirt. My light shot across the room, landing on the far corner. At first I didn't see it, but then the shape moved. Slow, deliberate. It stood on 2 legs, but it wasn't human. And in that moment, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. Time seemed to slow as I stood there, frozen in the basement of McCarty's house. The thing in the corner was hunched, its back arched, like it had spent too many years crawling through small spaces. Its skin, what little of it I could see in the dim light, was pale, almost translucent. And the smell that hit me was worse than anything I'd smelled in my life. Like rot, but sharper, more alive, if that makes sense. I don't mind admitting it, I was terrified. I'd seen drunks get violent, seen accidents that left people in pieces, but nothing could have prepared me for this. My training, my years of experience, it all went out the window in that moment. The thing turned its head, and it must have sensed me because it let out a sound. A screeching, grating noise that made my teeth clench. It wasn't just a sound, it was like it was trying to tear its way inside my head. I reached for my gun, but my hands were shaking too much. The thing lunged, faster than anything that big should move. I fired off 2 shots, both wild, both missing. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the basement. For a split second, I hoped it might scare the creature off. It didn't. It was on me in seconds, and I felt its hands or claws, whatever they were, dig into my arm. The pain shot up like fire, and I stumbled backward, crashing into an old shelf, sending tools and jars crashing to the floor. The smell of rust and decay filled my nostrils as I struggled against the creature's grip. In the chaos, my flashlight had fallen, casting wild shadows across the basement. I caught glimpses of the thing, a mouth full of jagged teeth, eyes that reflected the light like an animal's, skin that seemed to shift and move in impossible ways. I managed to kick it square in the chest, and it staggered back just enough for me to scramble up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut, bolting it with every lock I could find. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything over it, but I knew I had to get out. I ran outside, jumped into my cruiser, and floored it. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror, but that thing's screech, followed me the whole way. I didn't slow down until I hit the town limits, and even then I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that thing chasing after me. When I got back to town, I headed straight for the station. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because Denise, my deputy, took one look at me and asked if I'd been hit by a truck. I tried to explain, but how do you tell someone you just fought off something that looked like it crawled out of a nightmare? "Todd, you're bleeding," Denise said, her voice laced with concern. I looked down at my arm where the thing had grabbed me. There were deep scratches, almost like claw marks, running from my elbow to my wrist. They stung like hell now that I was noticing them. "What happened out there?" Denise asked as she grabbed the first aid kit. I opened my mouth to tell her, then closed it again. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd experienced? She'd think I was crazy. Hell, I was starting to think I was crazy. The clarity wasn't there, I said finally, wincing as Denise cleaned the wounds. Place was a mess, must have cut myself on some broken glass or something. Denise looked skeptical, but didn't push it. As she bandaged my arm, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that whatever I'd encountered in that basement wasn't going to stay there. And worst of all, I had a sinking feeling that Jim McCarty wasn't the only one who was going to go missing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, gun in hand, waiting. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside had me on edge. I thought about heading back, maybe bringing Denise with me. But what if that thing wasn't alone? What if found more? As the first light of dawn crept through my windows, I made a decision. I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. I couldn't pretend it didn't happen. Whatever that thing was, it was a threat to Clear Lake. And as sheriff, it was my job to protect this town, even if it meant facing my worst nightmares. Next morning, I decided to tell Johnson what I'd seen. Ask if he'd noticed anything strange. I figured if anyone in town would believe me, it'd be him. He was the one who called it in, after all. I found him out in his fields, checking on his crops. As I approached, I noticed the deep circles under his eyes, the way his hand shook slightly as he pushed his cap back. "Mr. Johnson," I called out. "Got a minute?" He turned, squinting at me in the morning sun. "Sheriff Casey didn't expect to see you out here so early." I took a deep breath and tried to figure out how to start. "Go down McCordy's place." Johnson's face darkened. "You find him?" I shook my head. "No, but I saw something. Something I can't explain." I told him everything, the basement, the bones, the creature. As I spoke, Johnson's face grew paler, his eyes wider. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, just staring out at his fields. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" I asked, suddenly feeling foolish. Big Johnson turned to me, his eyes dead serious. "No, Sheriff. I think you're the first person in this town to see what's really going on." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "McCarty's sheep are all gone. Every single one. No blood. No tracks. Just gone." A chill ran down my spine. When? Last night, Johnson said, and it's not just me. Got a call from Greta Hansen this morning. Her chickens all disappeared, and she said she heard noises in the night. I felt my heart rate picking up. What kind of noise? Johnson looked at me, fear clear in his eyes. Like something screaming, but not human, not animal either, like nothing she'd ever heard before. It was spreading. Whatever I'd encountered in McCordy's basement. It wasn't staying put, and it was hungry. We need to warn people, I said, already thinking about how to handle this. Get everyone on alert, maybe organize some kind of... and tell them what? Johnson interrupted. That there's some kind of monster running around eating livestock. I don't think we've both gone mad. He was right, of course. Clear Lake wasn't the kind of place that believed in monsters. Hell, I was having a hard time believing it myself. I'd seen the damn thing with my own eyes. So what do we do? I asked, feeling more helpless than I ever had as sheriff. Johnson was quiet for a moment, then said, "We watch, we wait, and we pray to God that whatever this thing is, it decides to move on before it gets worse." But even as he said it, I knew it was wishful thinking. This thing, whatever it was, had found a hunting ground, and I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to leave until there was nothing left to hunt. As I drove back to town, I couldn't shake the image of that creature from my mind. The way it moved, the sound it made. It was like something out of a nightmare, but I knew it was all too real. After the next few weeks, an uneasy quiet settled over Clear Lake. On the surface, things seemed normal. Folks went about their business, crops were tended, and life went on. But there was an undercurrent of fear, and a tension you could almost taste in the air. More animals went missing. First, it was just livestock, a few more chickens here, a couple of pigs there, but then pets started disappearing too. Mrs. Larson's cat vanished without a trace. The Russell kid's dog never came home one night. Each time I get the call, each time I drive out, knowing full well what I'd find, nothing, no blood, no signs of struggle, just empty pens and broken-hearted owners. I tried to keep it quiet, investigating without causing a panic. But in a town like Clear Lake, secrets don't stay secret for long. Whispers started, rumors spread. People began to look at their neighbors with suspicion, wondering if someone in town was responsible. If only it were that simple. I spent my nights patrolling, driving the dark country roads with my windows down, straining to hear that unearthly screech again. But whatever was out there, it was smart. It knew how to hide, how to hunt without being seen. Then came the night everything changed. It was about a month after my encounter at McCordy's place. I was at the station, drowning in paperwork and coffee when the call came in. It was Greta Hansen again, her voice high-pitched and panicked. "Sheriff, you need to come quick," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "There's something in my barn, something big." I was in my cruiser before she finished speaking, tearing down the road towards the Hansen farm. As I drove, I tried to prepare myself for what I might find. But nothing could have prepared me for the scene that awaited. The Hansen farm was in chaos. The few animals that were left were making a racket, their cries of distress echoing in the night air. Greta was on her porch clutching a shotgun, her face pale in the porch light. "It's in there," she said as I approached, nodding towards the barn. I had my eyes, went to check, saw something big, not right. I drew my gun, approaching the barn cautiously. The doors were slightly ajar, and from inside I could hear something moving, something heavy. "Stay here," I told Greta, my voice steadier than I felt. I pushed the door open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The smell hit me first, that same rotting, alive smell I'd encountered in McCordy's basement. My light caught movement in the back of the barn, and for a moment, I saw it. It was bigger than before. Its pale skin was stretched tight over bulging muscles. Its mouth was open in a silent snarl, rows of jagged teeth gleaming in the flashlight beam. And its eyes, God, its eyes were fixed right on me, glowing with a hunger that made my blood run cold. I fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The creature let out a bone-chilling screech and lunged toward me. I scrambled backward, firing again and again. I heard Greta screaming from outside. The animals in the barn going wild, then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Crashed through the back of the barn and disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but splintered wood and a trail of some dark, viscous fluid that I prayed wasn't blood. As the chaos subsided, I realized I couldn't hide this anymore. The thing was growing, getting bolder. It wasn't just animals disappearing now, it was attacking people, hunting them. I looked at Greta, her face a mask of terror and confusion. "Call everyone," I said. "Town meeting tomorrow morning early." It was time Clear Lake knew the truth. It was time they knew what we were up against. Because this wasn't just about protecting livestock anymore, this was about survival. The town hall was packed the next morning. Word had spread fast, and it seemed like every soul in Clear Lake had turned out. The air was thick with tension, and the low murmur of worried voices filled the room. I stood at the front, looking out at the sea of familiar faces, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, people I'd known my whole life, people who trusted me to keep them safe. And I was about to tell them that everything they thought they knew about their quiet little town was wrong. "Folks," I began, my voice cutting through the chatter. "I know there's been a lot of talk lately about missing animals, strange noises, things that don't add up." The room fell silent. All eyes on me. I'm here to tell you that those rumors are true, and it's worse than you think. Over the next hour, I laid it all out, everything I'd seen, everything I knew, the creature in McCordy's basement, the attack at Hanson Farm, the growing threat that was stalking our town. At first, there was disbelief, angry mutters, accusations of lies or madness. But as I continued and others started to speak up, Johnson, Greta Hansen, others who'd seen or heard things they couldn't explain, the mood in the room shifted. Fear set in. I saw it in their eyes, heard it in their voices as they asked questions I didn't have answers to. What was this thing? Where did it come from? How did we stop it? I don't know what it is, but I know it's dangerous, and I know it's not going away on its own. That's when the argument started. Some wanted to call in the state police, the FBI, anyone who might be able to help. Others wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, go on with their lives, and hope the problem would solve itself. And then there were those who wanted to fight, arm themselves, and hunt this thing down before it could hurt anyone else. In the end, we settled on a plan. Patrols would be set up. No one was to go out alone after dark. Any suspicious activity was to be reported immediately. We'd fortify what we could, prepare as best we were able. But as the meeting broke up and people filed out with fear in their eyes and determination in their steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in over our heads. And no matter what we did, it wouldn't be enough. That night, as I sat in my cruiser on the outskirts of town watching the darkness beyond the headlights, I made a decision. I couldn't wait for this thing to pick us off one by one. I couldn't hide behind patrols and precautions. We had to end this. Had to find whatever this creature was and stop it once and for all, even if it meant putting my own life on the line. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I started my car and headed out of town, towards McCarty's farm, towards the place where it all began. It was time to finish this. The sun was just peeking over the horizon as I pulled up to McCarty's farm. The place looked even more run down in the harsh morning lights, like the land itself was dying. I got out of the cruiser, my hand resting on my gun. The air was still, with no bird song or rustling of leaves. Just silence. The kind that comes before something terrible happens. I approached the house slowly, every sense on high alert. The front door was still open from my last visit, swinging gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. And inside, nothing had changed. The same mess, the same stench of decay. I made my way to the basement door. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was in my throat. This was it. Whatever answers there were, whatever this thing was, I'd find them down here. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I descended into darkness. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a dirt floor and scattered bones. But something was different. The gouges in the floor, which I'd seen before, were deeper now and more numerous. Like something had been pacing, restless, angry. And then I saw it, a hole in the far wall hidden behind some old shelving. It looked like something had clawed its way through concrete, leaving a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. I approached cautiously, shining my light into the opening. The tunnel sloped downward, its walls were slick with a mucus-like substance. The smell coming from it was overwhelming, a mix of rot and something else, something alien. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run, to get as far away from this place as I could. But I knew I couldn't. Whatever was down there threatened everything and everyone I'd sworn to protect. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and entered the tunnel. The passage twisted and turned, leading deeper underground. The air grew thick. It was hard to breathe. I lost track of time, of how far I'd come. It could have been minutes or hours, and then the tunnel opened up into a cavern. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling, but what it did illuminate made my blood run cold. The floor was littered with bones, not just animal bones, but human ones too. And they weren't old, some still had flesh clinging to them. Movement caught my eye as something massive shifted in the darkness beyond my light. I heard that familiar screech, but it was different now, deeper, angrier. I raised my gun, knowing it was useless, knowing I was outmatched. But I had to try. The creature emerged from the shadows, and I finally saw it clearly for the first time. It was enormous, easily twice the size it had been in the barn. Its pale skin was stretched tight over bulging muscles, and its mouth, God, its mouth was full of row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. But it was the eyes that got me. They were intelligent. Hungry, yes, but there was something else there, something that understood. This wasn't just some animal. This was something else entirely. It lunged at me, faster than anything that size should be able to move. I fired, the gunshots echoed in the cavern. The bullets hit. Dark ishar spilling from the wounds, but it didn't slow down. I dove to the side, feeling claws graze my back. I rolled, came up firing again. The creature screeched, the sound so loud it felt like my head would split open. We danced like that, in that cavern of bones and darkness, me firing and dodging, the creature always just a step behind, always just missing. But I was tiring. My movements were getting slower, my reactions dulled. And the creature seemed to be getting stronger. In a moment of desperation, I aimed at the cavern ceiling and fired. Rocks came crashing down. When the dust settled, I was alone. The creature had disappeared into some hidden tunnel or crevice. I stumbled out of the cavern, back through the twisting tunnel, my mind reeling. What was that thing? Where had it come from? And most importantly, how could we stop it? As I emerged from McCourty's basement into the harsh light of day, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The creature was still out there, hunting, waiting, growing stronger. And Clear Lake would never be the same. I got in my cruiser and headed back to town. I had calls to make, people to warn, a town to protect. Because now I knew the truth. The nightmares were real. And they were living right beneath our feet. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That somewhere out in those endless fields of corn, something was following me, waiting for its chance. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and my knuckles white. Whatever was out there, whatever that thing was, I'd be ready. I had to be. For Clear Lake. For everyone I'd sworn to protect. Even if it meant facing the darkness again. even if it meant staring into the abyss and hoping, praying that I'd come out the other side. Because the night isn't just dark anymore in Clear Lake, it's hungry. They always told me I had a knack for getting into trouble. Maybe it was my restless spirit, or maybe I just had a taste for the unusual. I never took it seriously until that fateful day, and my name is Conlon Bishop, and this is the story of how I survived something I still can't fully explain. There was a sweltering June afternoon when I received the call from my old college buddy, Graham Calhoun. Graham's voice crackled with excitement over the line, barely contained enthusiasm spilling through the receiver. "Conlon, my man," he exclaimed, not bothering with pleasantries. I chuckled, already anticipating another of Graham's wild schemes. "All right, I'll bite. What crazy thing have you gotten yourself into this time?" I asked, half joking, half serious. He bought a house, Conlon, and not just any house, an old plantation on the outskirts of New Orleans. It's a fixer-upper, but man, you should see the potential. Graham had always been one of those people who thrived on renovating old properties, making a fortune out of flipping them. He saw beauty in decay, which probably explained why he was friends with me in the first place. A plantation house in New Orleans? "Graham, have you lost your mind?" I asked, half joking, half serious. "Come on, rise your sense of adventure," Graham said. "I want your help to get this place in shape. Plus, it'll be like old times, you and me taking on a challenge. What do you say?" I hesitated. My job as a freelance writer meant I could work from anywhere, but something about this felt off. Maybe it was the way Graham's voice trembled slightly beneath his excitement, or maybe it was just my own overactive imagination. "I know, Graham. New Orleans in June. It's gonna be hot as hell. That's why God invented air conditioning, my friend. Look, I'll sweeten the deal, free room and board, and I'll even throw in a cut of the profits when we sell this beauty. Come on, Conlon. When was the last time you did something exciting?" He had me there. My life had fallen into a comfortable but monotonous routine. Maybe a change of scenery was exactly what I needed. All right. You've twisted my arm. Why do you want me there?" "Yes, Graham whooped. I knew you'd come through. How about next week? I'll text you the address. Trust me, Conlon. This is gonna be an experience you'll never forget." As I hung up the phone, a shiver ran down my spine despite the summer heat. I couldn't shake the feeling that Graham's words were more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. The next week passed in a blur of preparations and travel arrangements. Before I knew it, I was on a plane bound for New Orleans, the city of jazz, voodoo, and apparently Graham's latest real estate venture. As the plane descended through clouds heavy with humidity, I caught my first glimpse of the Mississippi River snaking through the landscape. The city sprawled beneath us, a patchwork of old and new, with the French Quarter's distinctive architecture standing out amidst more modern developments. Graham was waiting for me at the airport. His bold grin and enthusiastic wave of familiar sight had immediately put me at ease. We embraced, slapping each other on the back like no time had passed since our college days. "Conlon, you made it," Graham exclaimed, helping me with my bags. "Man, it's good to see you. How was the flight?" "Not bad," I replied, following him to his truck. "Though I think I left all my body moisture back in the air-conditioned cabin. How do you stand this heat?" Graham laughed, cranking up the AC in the truck as we pulled away from the airport. "You get used to it. Besides, the heat's part of the charm down here. Everything moves a little slower, feels a little more intense." As we drove, the city gave way to lush greenery. The road narrowed, lined on both sides by towering cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The air grew thicker, if that was even possible, filled with the chirping of cicadas and the occasional splash from unseen creatures in the nearby swamps. "So tell me more about this house of yours," I prompted, curiosity finally getting the better of me. Graham's eyes lit up. Oh man, Cameron, wait till you see it. It's got history character, sure. It needs some work. But the bones are good. And the location? Unbeatable. We're far enough out to have privacy, but close enough to the city to make it attractive to buyers. Sounds almost too good to be true. I'm used to it. What's the catch? For a moment, Graham's enthusiasm faltered. A shadow passed over his face so quickly that I almost missed it. The catch, he said, his voice a little too casual. Just need some TLC. That's all. Before I could press further, Graham turned off the main road onto a narrow, overgrown driveway. As we bumped along, the trees seemed to close in around us, branches scraping against the sides of the truck. Then suddenly we emerged into a clearing, and I got my first look at Graham's latest project. The plantation house loomed before us. A decaying giant of peeling paint and sagging porches. Vines climbed the walls, nature slowly reclaiming what man had built. Despite its dilapidated state, there was an undeniable grandeur to the place, a whisper of its former glory. Well, Graham asked, unable to contain his excitement, "What do you think?" I stared at the house, taking in its crumbling facade and the wild, overgrown grounds surrounding it. A chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive heat. For a moment I could have sworn I saw a shadow move behind one of the upper windows, but when I blinked it was gone. I think, I said slowly, that we've got our work cut out for us. Little did I know, as we unloaded my bags and headed towards the house, that restoring this old plantation would be the least of our worries. The true challenge, the true horror, was waiting for us in the depths of the bayou, biding its time until nightfall. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath our feet as Graham led me through the grand entrance of the plantation house. The air inside was stale and thick with dust, carrying the musty scent of age and neglect. Shafts of late afternoon sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating swirling moats and casting long shadows across the foyer. "Welcome to Cypress Grove," Graham announced, spreading his arms wide. "What do you think?" I stepped further into the house, my eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The foyer opened up into a large living area, complete with a sweeping staircase that led to the upper floors. Faded portraits hung crookedly on the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow our movements. "It's something," I replied, trying to keep the apprehension out of my voice. "How old is this place?" Graham ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of dust. It was built in the 1850s, if the records are correct. It's been abandoned for the last few decades, though. The previous owners couldn't keep up with the maintenance. As if on cue, a gust of wind whistled through the house, causing the structure to groan and settle. I jumped, my nerves already on edge. "Relax." Graham chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder. "It's just an old house. Come on, I'll show you to your room." We climbed the creaking staircase, our footsteps echoing in the empty house. The upper hallway was lined with doors, most of them closed. Graham led me to the end of the hall and pushed open a door. "Here we are," he said. I'd been staying in the room across the hall, figured we'd stick close, you know. The bedroom was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that looked out over the overgrown grounds. An ornate four-poster bed dominated the space, draped with sheets to protect it from dust. "It's not much now," Graham continued, "but once we get it cleaned up and restored, it will be amazing. Just imagine it, Coleman. We could turn this place into a bed and breakfast, or a high-end retreat. The possibilities are endless." I nodded, trying to share his enthusiasm, but something kept nagging at me. "Graham," I said slowly, "why did you really ask me to come here? I mean, I appreciate the offer, but surely there are more qualified people to help with a restoration like this." Graham's smile faltered for a moment. He looked away, his gaze drifting to the window. "I told you I needed help, and I thought it would be fun to work on this together like old times." "Graham," I pressed. "We haven't spoken in months, And now, suddenly, you're inviting me to stay in a rundown plantation house in the middle of nowhere. What's really going on? He sighed, his shoulders slumping. Alright, you got me. The truth is, I've been hearing things, Conlon, seeing things. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of things? It's probably nothing, he said quickly. Just my imagination running wild in this big old house. But sometimes at night I hear whispers and movements, like something's walking around when I know I'm alone. I stared at him, trying to gauge if he was joking. The look in his eyes was dead serious. Why didn't you tell me about this before? I asked. Would you have come if I had? He countered. Look, it's probably just the house settling or animals getting in somehow. I didn't want to be alone here anymore. I'm sorry I wasn't upfront about it. I ran a hand over my face, feeling a headache coming on. Part of me wanted to turn around and head straight back to the airport. Looking at Graham, seeing the mixture of hope and fear in his eyes, I knew I couldn't leave him here alone. Alright, I sighed. I'm here now. We'll figure this out together, okay? Warren's relief was palpable. Thanks, man. I knew I could count on you. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn, we set about making the house somewhat livable. We cleared away cobwebs, wiped down surfaces, and tried to coax some life back into the ancient plumbing. By the time night fell, we had managed to create a semi-comfortable living space in the kitchen and our bedrooms. We sat at the old wooden table, eating sandwiches we had picked up on the way from the airport and drinking lukewarm beer. So I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "Tell me more about these occurrences you've been experiencing." Graham shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It's hard to explain. Sometimes it's just a feeling, like someone's watching me. Other times I'll catch movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. And I suppose he prompted. He shuddered. Those are the worst. They usually happen at night, when everything's quiet. It's like someone's having a conversation just on the edge of hearing. And then I'll make out the words, but it sounds urgent, almost angry. I nodded, trying to process this information. Have you considered that maybe this place is just getting to you? Old houses like this, they play tricks on your mind. I've considered everything, Graham said. A hint of frustration in his voice. I'm not crazy if that's what you're implying. Something's not right here. Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the house. We both jumped, our chairs scraping against the floor as we stood. What was that? I whispered, my heart pounding. Graham shook his head, his face pale. I don't know. It came from upstairs, I think. We stood frozen for a moment, straining our ears for any further sounds. The house had fallen eerily silent. We should check it out, I said finally, though every instinct was screaming at me to run. Graham nodded, reaching for a heavy flashlight on the counter. Stay close, he muttered. We crept out of the kitchen and into the foyer, our footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. The staircase loomed before us, the upper landing shrouded in darkness. As we ascended, the stairs creaking beneath our weight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The portraits on the walls seemed to leer at us, their painted eyes following our progress. We reached the top of the stairs, pausing to listen. The hallway stretched out before us, a tunnel of shadows broken only by the beam of Graham's flashlight. Which room? I whispered. Graham pointed towards the far end of the hall. I think it came from there. We inched forward, the floorboards groaning beneath us. As we neared the room, a cold draft washed over us, raising goosebumps on my arms despite the lingering heat. Graham reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at me and I nodded, bracing myself for whatever we might find. The door swung open with a piercing creak. Graham's flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing nothing. The room was empty, save for a few pieces of sheet-covered furniture. "I don't understand," Graham muttered, stepping into the room. I was sure the sound came from here. I followed him in, my eyes darting to every corner, half expecting something to jump out at us. But the room remained still and silent. Then I noticed something. "Graham," I said, pointing. "A window." The large bay window was wide open, its tattered curtains billowing in the night breeze. Shards of broken glass littered the floor beneath it. Graham approached the window cautiously, shining his light out into the darkness. The overgrown lawn stretched out below us, the trees at its edge swaying gently in the wind. "Maybe it was just the wind," I suggested, though I didn't quite believe it myself. An old window like this, it probably didn't take much to break it. Graham nodded slowly, but I could see he wasn't convinced either. But maybe he said, "Let's board this up for now. We can deal with it properly in the morning." As we turned to leave the room, a floorboard creaked behind us. We spun around, our hearts racing, but the room remained empty. "Did you hear that?" Graham whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. And then, so faint I almost thought I imagined it, I heard it. Whispers, like multiple voices speaking just below the threshold of hearing. Our words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Urgent, angry, warning. "Graham," I said, my voice shaking. "I think we should leave. Now." He nodded, his face ashen. Yeah, let's go." We backed out of the room slowly, neither of us willing to turn our backs on the empty space. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut with a bang that echoed through the house. We didn't stop running until we were back in the kitchen, our chests heaving as we tried to catch our breath. "Still think it's just the house settling?" Graham asked, his voice hysterical. I shook my head, unable to rationalize what we had just experienced. "What the hell have you gotten us into, Graham?" As we sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, the enormity of our situation began to sink in. We were alone in this decaying mansion, miles from the nearest neighbor, with something that defied explanation. It was only our first night at Cypress Grove. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the trees outside had me sitting bolt upright in bed, my heart racing. The events in the upstairs room played on a loop in my mind, each replay making it seem more surreal and terrifying. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the grimy windows, I gave up on sleep entirely. Throwing on some clothes, I made my way downstairs, wincing at every groan of the floorboards beneath my feet. I found Graham already in the kitchen, hunched over a mug of coffee. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually meticulously styled hair was a disheveled mess. I looked up as I entered, offering a weak smile. "Rough night?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Barely slept, you?" "The same," I admitted, taking a seat across from him. "Graham, we need to talk about what happened last night." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I know, I'm sorry, Colin. I should have told you everything from the start." But Graham began, his voice low and serious. "There's more to this house than I initially told you. When I bought it, I did some digging into its history. Cypress Grove has a complicated past. I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued, despite my lingering fear. "What kind of past?" Graham took a deep breath. "The plantation was built in 1853 by a man named Jeremiah Beaumont. He was known for his cruelty, both to his slaves and his own family. There were rumors of dark rituals, of people disappearing into the swamps, never to be seen again." A chill ran down my spine. "And you bought this place knowing all that?" Graham shrugged, looking somewhat sheepish. "I thought it was just local legend, you know. Every old house has its ghost stories. I didn't believe any of it until I started experiencing things myself. Things like what we saw last night. Graham nodded, and more. Sometimes I hear screams coming from the swamp. Other times I've seen figures moving through the house, but when I try to follow them, they vanish. I sat back, trying to process this information. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as superstition and an overactive imagination. But after what I'd experienced last night, I couldn't deny that something strange was happening here. So what do we do now? I asked. Graham's eyes lit up with a familiar determination. We investigate. If we can understand what's happening here, maybe we can put a stop to it, or at least learn to live with whatever's here. I raised an eyebrow, played with. Graham, are you saying you still want to renovate this place? He had the decency to look embarrassed. I've sunk everything I have into this property, Conlon. I can't just walk away. Besides, aren't you even a little curious about what's going on here? Before I could answer, a loud thump echoed from upstairs. We both froze, our eyes meeting across the table. Did you hear that? Graham whispered. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dropped. It sounded like it came from the room we were in last night. Graham stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. We should check it out. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to refuse, to run as far from this house as possible. But looking at Graham's determined face, I knew I couldn't leave him to face this alone. Alright, I sighed, getting to my feet. But if we see anything like last night, we're getting out of here. Agreed? Graham nodded, already heading for the stairs. Agreed. We climbed the stairs slowly, every creak of the old wood setting my nerves on edge. The upstairs hallway seemed longer and darker than I remembered, the closed doors lining it like silent sentinels. As we approached the room from last night, I noticed something odd. A faint light seemed to be seeping out from under the door, flickering like candlelight. Graham, I whispered, pointing. He nodded, his face pale but determined. Slowly he reached for the doorknob. The door swung open with a creak, and we both gasped at what we saw. The room had transformed. One was the empty, dusty space from the night before. Instead, we found ourselves looking at what appeared to be a study from another time. A large desk dominated the room, covered in old papers and leather-bound books. Candles flickered in ornate holders, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And there, seated at the desk, was a man. He looked up as we entered, his face a mask of surprise and anger. He was dressed in clothes from another century, a high-collared shirt, waistcoat, and cravat. His hair was gray and wild, his eyes sunken but burning with an intense light. "Who dares intrude upon my sanctuary?" he demanded, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. Graham and I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. This couldn't be real, it had to be some kind of hallucination or trick of the light. The man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I asked you a question. Who are you, and what are you doing in my house? I found my voice first. Your house. This is Graham's house. He bought it. The man's face contorted with rage. Bought it? This house cannot be bought or sold. It is mine, as it has always been and always will be. He took a step towards us, and I noticed with growing horror that I could see through him to the wall behind. This was no trick, no hallucination. We were face to face with a ghost. Graham, I whispered, tugging on his arm. We need to go now. But Graham stood his ground, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Are you Jeremiah Beaumont? The ghost stopped, surprised, replacing anger on his translucent face. You know of me? Graham nodded slowly. I've read about you. You built this house in 8. Jeremiah's form seemed to flicker like a candle in a draft. 2053. Has it been so long? Time loses all meaning in this cursed existence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We were having a conversation with a ghost. with the original owner of Cypress Grove. Part of me was terrified, but another part, the writer in me perhaps, was utterly fascinated. "Mr. Beaumont," I said, finding courage I didn't know I had. "Can you tell us what happened to you? Why are you still here?" The ghost's eyes fixed on me, and I felt a chill that went beyond physical cold. "I am bound to this place by my own misdeeds, cursed to walk these halls for eternity, but I am not alone. There are others, darker things that dwell in the shadows of Cypress Grove." As if on cue, a low animalistic growl echoed from somewhere in the house. Jeremiah's form flickered again, fear replacing the anger in his eyes. "You must leave this place," he said urgently. "It is not safe."
"The beast hungers, and it will not rest until it has claimed you both."
Before we could ask what he meant, Jeremiah's form dissipated like smoke in the wind. The room around us shimmered and faded, leaving us once again in the empty, dusty space we had entered. Graham and I looked at each other, both of us pale and shaking. "Did that really just happen?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Graham nodded slowly. "I think it did, and I think we're way over our heads here, Colin." As if to emphasize his point, another growl echoed through the house, closer this time. Whatever the beast was that Jeremiah had mentioned, it sounded like it was on the move. "We need to get out of here," I said, already backing towards the door. Graham hesitated for a moment, looking around the room as if hoping Jeremiah would reappear. Then he nodded. "Yeah, let's go." We turned to leave, only to find our exit blocked. Standing in the doorway was a creature straight out of a nightmare, vaguely humanoid but covered in matted fur, with long, wickedly sharp claws and eyes that glowed with an unholy light. The Bayou beast had found us. Time seemed to stand still as we faced the monstrous creature. Its breath came in ragged pants, filling the air with the stench of decay. Those glowing eyes fixed on us with predatory intensity, and I knew with certainty that we were looking at our deaths. Graham was the first to break the paralysis. With a yell that was equal parts terror and defiance, he grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it at the beast. The creature batted it aside effortlessly, the wood splintering against the wall, but the distraction was enough. "Run!" Graham shouted, shoving me towards the window. We scrambled across the room. The beast's roar shook the very foundations of the house. I could hear its heavy footsteps behind us, feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. The window was still broken from the night before, jagged shards of glass clinging to the frame. Without hesitation, Graham threw himself through the opening. I heard him hit the overgrown lawn below with a thud and a groan. I didn't have time to think. The beast was upon me. Its claws raked the air where I had been standing a split second before. I dove through the window, feeling glass cut into my arms and face as I fell. The impact with the ground knocked the wind out of me. For a moment I lay there gasping, certain that at any second I would feel the beast's claws tearing into me. But the attack never came. "Clumlin!" Graham's voice was tight with pain and fear. He cut through my daze. "Get up. We need to move." I staggered to my feet, wincing at the multitude of cuts and bruises I had acquired. Graham was already up, limping but mobile. We shared a quick glance, then turned and ran towards the tree line at the edge of the property. Behind us, the beast's roar split the air once more. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature had squeezed its massive form through the window and was now bounding across the lawn towards us with terrifying speed. The trees. Graham panted as we ran. If we can make it to the swamp, maybe we can lose it. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The sounds of pursuit were close behind, too close. The trees grew denser, the ground beneath our feet becoming soggy. We were entering the swamp proper now, the air thick with humidity and the buzz of insects. Cypress knees rose from the murky water, creating a maze-like environment. This way, Graham gasped, veering to the left. I followed without question, too focused on staying upright and keeping moving to argue. We splashed through shallow water, mud sucking at our shoes. The beast's roars had faded somewhat, but I could still hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind us. It wasn't giving up. Suddenly Graham stumbled, crying out in pain. He fell hard, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Graham, I skidded to a stop, turning back to help him. "No," he shouted, his face contorted with pain and fear. "Keep going, you have to get help." I hesitated, torn between helping my friend and the very real danger that was rapidly approaching. The decision was made for me when the beast burst into view. Its massive form somehow even more terrifying in the dappled light of the swamp. "Run, Corley," Graham yelled, trying to drag himself away from the approaching monster. With a final agonized look at my friend, I turned and ran. The beast's roar of triumph mixed with Graham's scream of terror. The sounds chasing me deeper into the swamp. I ran blindly, branches scratching my face, mud splashing up my legs. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed for rest, but I didn't dare stop. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the beast was still out there, hunting me. How long I ran, I couldn't say. Time lost all meaning in the green twilight of the swamp. Eventually, my body gave out. I collapsed against the gnarled trunk of a massive cypress tree, my chest heaving as I gulped in air. As my panic slowly subsided, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was lost in a swamp miles from civilization, being hunted by a monster straight out of legend. And Graham, oh God, Graham, the memory of his scream echoed in my mind, and I felt tears start to form in my eyes. A twig snapped nearby, and I froze. Holding my breath, I strained my ears, trying to determine if it was the beast or just some swamp creature. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity of fear. Then from the gloom, a figure emerged. For a moment, my heart leapt into my throat, certain it was the beast come to finish me off. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was human, an old woman, her dark skin wrinkled and weathered, her white hair a stark contrast to the greens and browns of the swamp. She regarded me with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. When she spoke, her voice was rough but not unkind. "You shouldn't be here, child. These parts ain't safe for the likes of you." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was seeing. Who is who? A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Folks around here call me Mama Lavo. And you, I reckon, are the fool who's been stirring up trouble at Old Cypress Grove." I nodded, too exhausted and scared to deny it. "Please, you have to help me. There's a monster out there." It got my friend, and the Lavo's eyes narrowed. "The beast," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's been a long time since it hunted these parts. You awakened something ancient and angry, child." "I don't understand," I said. Frustration mixing with fear. "What is that thing? Why is it after us?" The old woman sighed, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. "It's a long story, and one we ain't got time for right now. That beast will be on your trail, and we need to get you somewhere safe before it picks up your scent again." She turned, gesturing for me to follow. "Come on, child. My place isn't far, and I've got wards that'll keep that creature at bay, for a time at least." I hesitated, glancing back the way I had come. "But what about Graham? I can't just leave him out there." Mama Lavo's expression softened slightly. "If your friend is still alive, the best thing you can do for him is come with me. You ain't no use to him, dead, and that's what you'll be if you go blundering back out there." As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. I was in no condition to mount a rescue, and I had no idea where Graham was or if he was even still alive. With a heavy heart, I nodded and followed Mama Lavo deeper into the swamp. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Whether it was the beast The ghosts of Cypress Grove or something else entirely, I couldn't say. All I knew was that I had stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And somehow I had to find a way to save Graham and put an end to the horrors of Cypress Grove before they put an end to me. Mama Lavo's home was a ramshackle cabin perched on stilts above the swamp water. As we approached, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wood of the stilts. A door frame, protective wards, I assumed, like the one she had mentioned. The interior of the cabin was a cluttered mix of the mundane and the mystical. Drying herbs hung from the ceiling, jars of unidentifiable substances lined rough-hewn shelves, and in one corner an old television sat incongruously among candles and animal bones. "Sit," Mama Lavo instructed, pointing to a worn armchair. "You look like you're about to fall over." I sank into the chair gratefully, my body finally registering the full extent of my injuries, now that the immediate danger had passed. Mama Labo busied herself at a small stove, soon returning with a steaming mug of something that smelled strongly of herbs and spices. "Drink this," she said, passing me the mug. "It'll help with the pain and clear your head." I took a cautious sip. The liquid was bitter, but not unpleasant, and I could feel a warmth spreading through my body almost immediately. "Thank you," I said, taking another sip. "For everything. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." Mama Lavo waved away my thanks, settling into a chair across from me. "Don't thank me yet, child. You're still in a world of trouble, and I ain't sure I can get you out of it." I set the mug down, leaning forward. "Please, I need to understand what's happening. What is that creature, and why is it after us?" The old woman sighed, her eyes taking on a faraway look. "The beast has been part of these swamps for longer than anyone can remember. Some say it's a curse brought on by the evil deeds of men like Jeremiah Beaumont. Others say it's something older, a guardian of the land that tunes its wrath on those who disturb the natural order." "But why now?" I asked. "Graham said he'd been at the house for weeks before I arrived. Why did the beast only start attacking us recently?" Mama Lavo shook her head. "The beast ain't like you and me. It don't think in days or weeks. It sleeps for years, decades even, only waking when it senses a threat to its domain. Your friend, buying that house, planned to change it. That was enough to stir it from its slumber." I run a hand through my hair, wincing as my fingers brushed against cuts and bruises. "So what do we do? How do we stop it?" "Stop it?" Mama Lavo let out a dry chuckle. "Child, you don't stop the beast," she said. "You survive it if you're lucky, or leave and hope it goes back to sleep." "I can't leave," I said, thinking of Graham. "My friend is still out there. I have to help him." The old woman regarded me for a long moment, her dark eyes seeming to look right through me. Finally, she nodded. "You got a good heart, child," she said. "Foolish, maybe, but good. It'll help you, but you gotta understand. This ain't gonna be easy, and it ain't gonna be safe." She stood up, moving to one of the crowded shelves. After a moment of searching, she returned with a small leather pouch and a vial of murky liquid. "The pouch has herbs that'll mask your scent from the beast," she explained. "The vial, well, let's hope you don't need to use that. It's powerful magic and it comes with a price." I took the items, tucking them into my pockets. "What kind of price?" Mama Lavo's expression was grave. "The kind that changes a person inside and out," she said. "Use it only if you have no other choice." I nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the weight of her words. "What's our next move?" "First you rest," she said firmly. "Might no good to your friend if you can barely stand. Come nightfall, we'll head back to Cypress Grove. The beast is strongest in the dark, but so is the old magic. It's our best chance of finding your friend and putting an end to this mess." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the swamp, Mama Lava and I set out. The journey back to Cypress Grove was tense. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. But true to her word, the herbs seemed to keep the beast at bay. The plantation house loomed before us, somehow even more menacing in the gathering darkness. As we approached, I saw a movement in one of the upper windows, a pale face peering out, then gone in an instant. "The ghosts are restless," Momalavo murmured. "They know something's coming." We entered the house cautiously. The interior was a wreck, furniture overturned and claw marks scoring the walls. There was no sign of Graham, but a trail of blood led up the stairs. With heavy hearts, we followed the trail. It led us to the study where we had encountered Jeremiah's ghost. Our room was empty, but the air felt thick with an unseen presence. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The ghostly form of Jeremiah Beaumont materialized before us, his face contorted with anguish. "He shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "The beast has your friend. It's taken him to the heart of its lair deep in the swamp. Can you take us there?" Us desperately. Jeremiah shook his head. "I'm bound to this house, but I can show you the way." He gestured, and an image appeared in the air, a decrepit old well half hidden by vines and moss. "The entrance to the beast's lair," Mamalava breathed. "I know where that is." As we turned to leave, Jeremiah's voice stopped us. He warned, "The beast is more than just a creature. It's the embodiment of the evil that men do. To truly defeat it, you must confront the darkness within yourselves." With those cryptic words, he vanished. Mother Love and I shared a look, then steeled ourselves for what lay ahead. The well was exactly where Jeremiah's vision had shown us. As we approached, I could feel an oppressive energy emanating from its depths. "This is as far as I go, child," Mother Lavo said. "The magic down there, it's beyond my powers. From here on out, you're on your own." I nodded, grateful for her help but understanding her reluctance. With a deep breath, I began to climb down into the darkness. The tunnel at the bottom of the well seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning until I lost all sense of direction. Finally, it opened up into a vast underground cavern, and there in the center was Graham. He was alive but barely conscious, suspended in some kind of organic cocoon. The beast loomed over him, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. As I stepped forward, the beast turned to face me. But instead of attacking, it spoke, its voice a guttural growl that somehow formed words. "So the other one returns," it said. "Have you come to join your friend?" "We've come to stop you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The beast laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Stop me, I am eternal. I am a darkness in men's hearts given form. You cannot stop me any more than you can stop the tide." As it sparked, I felt a creeping darkness in my own mind, whispering temptations and dark desires. I realized then what Jeremiah had meant. The beast wasn't just a physical threat, it was a manifestation of evil itself. With trembling hands, I reached for the vial Mama Lavo had given me. The beast's eyes widened in recognition. "Would you risk everything to save your friend? Even your own soul?" I looked at Graham, then back at the beast. "Yes," I said simply, and drank the contents of the vial. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Power coursed through me, ancient and terrible. I could feel myself changing, becoming something other than human. The beast roared in fury and charged, but now I was its equal. We clashed in a battle that shook the very foundations of the cavern. As we fought, I realized the true nature of the magic I had invoked. It wasn't about physical strength, but about will. The beast fed on darkness and fear. To defeat it, I had to embrace light and hope. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I focused on all the good in the world, on friendship, love, and sacrifice. The beast howled as my light burned away its darkness. On a final cataclysmic burst of energy, the beast was banished, its form dissolving into nothingness. As the echoes of our battle faded, I rushed to free Graham. He was weak but alive, and together we made our way back to the surface. Mama Laveau was waiting for us, her eyes wide with amazement. "You did it, child," she said softly. "You faced the darkness and came out the other side." I nodded, feeling the changes the magic had wrought in me. I was no longer the same person who had entered that well, but Graham was safe and the beast was gone. For now, that was enough. In the days that followed, we worked to cleanse Cypress Grove of its dark energy. The ghosts, led by Jeremiah, finally found peace and moved on. Graham decided to donate the property to a local historical society, ensuring it would be preserved but never inhabited again. As for me, I knew I could never return to my old life. The magic I had used had marked me, giving me a connection to the hidden world of spirits and monsters. There would be other beasts, other darkness to fight. But as I stood on the porch of Cypress Grove one last time, watching the sun rise over the bayou, I felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. I had faced the darkness, both within and without, and emerged stronger for it.